The smoke rose black against the copper sky, a twisted column marking death in a land that had seen too much of it. Elias Blackwood spotted it from 2 miles out, his weathered face hardening beneath the shadow of his hat brim. The Springfield rifle lay across his saddle, a companion older than most of the graves in Redemption. He dug his heels into his horse's flanks, urging the animal toward the burning homestead. At 52, Elias had seen enough fires to know this one wasn't started by accident. 20 years as a Union scout and 5 more fighting Apaches had taught him to read the land like a preacher reads scripture. This was deliberate. Someone wanted to erase more than just wood and nails. As he crested the ridge, the tableau before him froze his blood colder than any Arizona winter. A man on horseback thundered away from the blaze, dragging something behind him. No someone. A woman, her body bouncing like a rag doll across the hard pan, her screams carried away by the hot desert wind. Elias raised his Springfield sighting down the barrel at the rider's back. 600 yards, a difficult shot even for him. His finger tensed on the trigger, his breath slowing as he'd learned to do in the war. Then the rope snapped or was cut, and the woman's body tumbled to a lifeless stop in a cloud of ochre dust. The rider never looked back, disappearing into the heat haze like a devil returning to hell. "God damn it all," Elias muttered, lowering his rifle. He spurred his horse toward the fallen woman, scanning the horizon for any sign of company. The desert offered no place to hide, but it had taught him caution all the same. Up close, the woman was younger than he'd thought, mid-30s perhaps, with dark hair matted with blood and dust. Her clothes were torn to ribbons, her skin a roadmap of cuts and bruises. But she was breathing shallow gasps that spoke of incredible will in the face of unimaginable pain. Something in her face triggered a memory faded but not forgotten. Camp Verde 78 or 79 during the last Apache campaign. A field hospital under canvas, the smell of blood and disinfectant, a young nurse with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much. "Miss Collins," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Elias dismounted, his knees protesting years of hard riding. He knelt beside her, gently turning her face away from the dirt. Yes, it was her Lydia Collins, Army nurse. She'd stitched him up after Skeleton Canyon pulled a bullet from his shoulder with more skill than most surgeons he'd known. What in God's name was she doing out here? The burning homestead offered no answers, only questions. Whose place was it? Why would someone drag her like that, leaving her to die under the merciless sun? And the rider, Elias, had only caught a glimpse, but something about him seemed familiar. With careful hands, he lifted Lydia onto his horse, mounting behind her to keep her steady. His ranch was closer than town, and town meant questions he wasn't ready to answer. Not until he knew what kind of storm was brewing. The cool darkness of Elias's cabin was a mercy after the punishing heat. He laid Lydia on his bed, the only proper one in the house, and set about the grim work of assessing her wounds. He'd seen men torn apart in war, but there was something uniquely savage about what had been done to her. This wasn't just violence, it was a message. He cleaned her wounds with whiskey and water, bandaged what he could, and waited. Outside, the light faded from copper to deep purple as the sun surrendered to the night. Elias sat in a hand-carved chair by the bed, rifle across his knees, listening to the woman's labored breathing and the subtle symphony of night creatures beyond his walls. When she finally stirred, it was with a violent start, her eyes flying open in terror, hands clawing at invisible bonds. "Easy," Elias said, keeping his distance. "You're safe now." Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes, fighting through pain and confusion. "Sergeant Blackwood." Her voice was a ghost of itself, raw from screaming. "Just Elias now," he replied. "The Army and I parted ways a long time ago." She tried to sit up, wincing, as her body reminded her of its condition. "Where am I?" "My ranch about 15 miles east of Redemption." He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup, offering it to her. "Small place, but it's quiet. No one comes out this way much." She drank carefully, each swallow visibly painful. When she'd finished, she fixed him with a man that carried echoes of the competent nurse he'd known. "Did you see him? The man who did this?" Elias shook his head. "Only from a distance. Couldn't make out his face." A bitter smile crossed her cracked lips. "Samuel Weber, railroad man, the territory's newest success story." She closed her eyes, fighting back tears, or perhaps just pain. "He dragged me behind his horse for what felt like miles." "Do you know why Sergeant—" "Elias," he corrected gently. "And no, I don't know why a man would do something like that to anyone, let alone a woman." "Because I found them." Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if the walls themselves might carry her words to dangerous ears. "The missing girls. Not all of them, but enough to know." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Over the past year, rumors had circulated about young women disappearing, mostly immigrants or Indians, people whose absence wouldn't stir much official concern. But lately there had been others, daughters of settlers, whose frantic parents were met with shrugs from the law. "What did you find, Miss Collins?" "Lydia," she insisted, a small echo of his own correction. "I found evidence. Names, dates, transactions." She shifted painfully. "I've been working as a nurse at a small clinic for the past 3 years, serving anyone who can't afford the town doctor. Lately I've been treating girls who wouldn't say how they got hurt. Brands on their skin burns worse things." She drew a shaky breath. "My sister Ruth disappeared 5 years ago. They said she ran off with a man, but I never believed it. When I came west to find her, I started noticing patterns. Girls vanishing along the railroad's expansion path. Always the vulnerable ones first, then others, when no one raised alarms." Elias nodded slowly. The railroad's push through Arizona territory had brought prosperity to some, desperation to others. The Southern Pacific was reshaping the land, deciding which towns would thrive and which would die. Redemption was betting its future on the steel rails and the promises of men like Weber. "I was gathering evidence," Lydia continued. "Records of girls who came through my clinic, descriptions of their injuries, names they whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. I was going to take it to the federal marshal in Tucson." Her face crumpled. "Weber found my clinic, burned everything. He would have killed me there, but I ran." "How'd he catch you?" "Horse threw me about 3 miles out. He found me on the road." She turned her face away. "You know the rest." Elias stood, moving to the window to peer out at the darkness. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the desert scrub. Weber was no ordinary railroad man. He was the Southern Pacific's special representative tasked with acquiring land and rights of way throughout the territory. He had the governor's ear, the sheriff's cooperation, and enough money to make problems disappear. "You need to rest," Elias said finally. "We'll figure out what to do in the morning." "There's nothing to figure out," Lydia replied, her voice suddenly stronger. "I'm going back. Those girls deserve justice, and I won't be the one who failed them." Elias turned, studying her with new respect. "That's a quick way to die, Miss Collins." "I've been dying slowly for 5 years, looking for my sister." Her eyes met his, fever bright but clear. At least this way would mean something. He recognized the look. He'd seen it in soldiers who'd found their purpose in the chaos of war. It was the face of someone who'd crossed a line and couldn't go back, someone who'd weighed their life against their cause and found the scales tipped toward sacrifice. "Get some sleep," he said more gently than before. "Nothing's going to happen tonight." But as she drifted into uneasy slumber, Elias Blackwood knew sleep would elude him. He'd built this small ranch to escape the violence of his past, to find peace in solitude. Now violence had found him again, wearing a new face but carrying the same stench of power, corrupted, and lives discarded. The last thing he wanted was another fight. But as he watched Lydia's bruised face in the moonlight, something long dormant stirred inside him, a sense of duty he thought he'd buried with his uniform. Dawn broke harsh and clear, the way it always did in Arizona territory. Elias had spent the night in his chair, dozing in fits and starts, the Springfield never leaving his grip. He'd been plagued by memories not just of the war, but of his daughter Sarah's face the last time he saw her boarding a stagecoach bound for California 2 years ago. 26 years old, eager to start fresh, promising to write. The letters had come regularly at first, then sporadically, then stopped altogether 8 months ago. Lydia was awake when he returned from tending the horses, sitting up in bed, despite what must have been considerable pain. Some color had returned to her face and her eyes were clearer, more focused. She'd found one of his shirts and put it on over her ruined clothes, the sleeves rolled up several times to fit her smaller frame. "You look better," he observed, setting a pot of coffee on the small stove. "I've had worse," she replied, though they both knew it was a lie. He poured her a cup of coffee once it was ready, black and strong enough to stand a spoon in. "What exactly did you find at Weber's place?" Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she took the cup. "Not at his place. At Camp 7. Camp 7. It's what the girls called it, a labor camp supposedly for railroad construction, but it's not on any official map." She sipped the coffee, grimacing at either the taste or the memory. "I followed one of Weber's men there last month. It's hidden in a box canyon about 30 miles northwest of here. They bring girls there after they're broken." Elias felt his jaw tighten. Broken. The ones who fight back at first. The ones who won't submit willingly. Her clinical detachment was belied by the whiteness of her knuckles around the cup. "They're sent to Silver Palace in Prescott first. That's the high-end brothel Weber has interest in. The ones who can't be controlled are transferred to Camp 7. Officially, they're laborers. In reality, they're slaves." Elias had seen slavery during the war, had fought to end it. The idea that it was happening here under a different name but with the same cruelty sickened him. I found records, Lydia continued, not just of the girls, but of the men who used them. Politicians, businessmen, even a judge, all with their special preferences noted. And Weber caught you with these records? She nodded. I hid the most important one, though. A black book with names, dates, transactions. I buried it before he caught me. Where? An old gravesite about a mile from here. I was trying to reach your ranch when Weber found me. She set the coffee down. I knew about you from Army records. A scout who became a rancher lived alone, minded his business. I thought you might help. Elias said nothing for a long moment. Then, my daughter Sarah went to work for the railroad company 2 years ago, in their San Francisco office supposedly. Her letters stopped coming 8 months back. Understanding dawned in Lydia's eyes. What was her full name? Sarah Blackwood, 28 now. Lydia closed her eyes and he knew before she spoke. She's in the book, Elias. I remember the name because it was unusual to see a woman from San Francisco. She met his gaze directly. She was transferred to Camp 7 4 months ago. The coffee cup in Elias's hand shattered hot liquid, splashing across the wooden floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. We need to get that book, he said finally, his voice a ghost of itself. And then I'm going to kill Samuel Weber and burn his whole goddamn operation to the ground. The coldness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Lydia Collins nodded, a soldier recognizing a declaration of war. I'll help you, she said simply. Outside, a horse nickered, not one of his. Elias moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight. A rider was approaching, the dust from his horse visible against the morning light. The man wore a badge that caught the sun. Deputy, Elias muttered. Harlan, Weber's man in the sheriff's office. Lydia struggled to her feet, pain forgotten in the face of more immediate danger. He can't find me here. Elias nodded toward a trap door near the stove. Root cellar, small, but it'll hide you. As she limped toward it, he caught her arm gently. Whatever happens, don't make a sound. Harlan's not one for asking questions twice. She disappeared into the darkness below, and Elias closed the trap door, kicking a small rug over it just as a knock sounded at the cabin door. Deputy Marshal Harlan was a thin man with the hungry look of someone who'd known poverty and would do anything to avoid returning to it. His badge gleamed too brightly against his dusty clothes, as if he polished it more often than he washed. Blackwood, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Been a while. Would Deputy Elias acknowledged, not inviting him in. What brings you out this way? Harlan's eyes scanned the cabin interior visible through the doorway. Looking for a woman. Nurse named Collins. Burned down her clinic yesterday, stole from her patients. Railroad's offering a reward. Haven't seen any woman out this way in months, Elias replied evenly. Kind of the reason I live here. Harlan's thin lips curved in what might generously be called a smile. Mind if I look around, just being thorough? It wasn't really a question. Elias stepped aside, hand never straying far from the knife at his belt. The Springfield was leaning against the wall, near the bed, too far to reach if things went south. Harlan made a show of inspecting the cabin's single-room, eyes lingering on the broken coffee cup and the bed with its rumpled sheets. Cut yourself, he asked, nodding toward the cup. Clumsy before my coffee, Elias replied. The deputy's boot stopped just shy of the rug covering the trapdoor. For a moment, Elias thought he'd have to kill him right there. But Harlan moved on, completing his circuit of the cabin before returning to the doorway. If you see her, there's $50 in it for you, he said. Dead or alive, though Weber prefers alive. I'll keep an eye out, Elias lied. Harlan nodded but made no move to leave. One more thing. You heard from that daughter of yours lately. Sarah wasn't it. Ice formed in Elias's gut. Not for some time. She's in California. Funny, Harlan said, not looking amused at all. Weber mentioned her just yesterday. Said she'd been asking questions about some missing girls. Said you might be involved. Weber doesn't know my daughter. Says he does. Says she's working for him now. Harlan's eyes glittered with malice, poorly disguised as concern. Might want to write her, see if she's all right. The threat hung in the air between them, clear as a noose against the sky. I'll do that, Elias said, his voice betraying nothing of the rage building inside him. After Harlan rode away, Elias waited a full 5 minutes before opening the trapdoor. Lydia climbed out, her face pale but composed. He was lying about Sarah, she said immediately. She's not working for Weber. She's a prisoner. Elias nodded, checking his rifle with mechanical precision. We need to get that book. Then we need to find out exactly where Camp 7 is. And then, Lydia asked, though she already knew. Then we're going to free every girl in that place, Elias said, his voice like iron striking stone. And Weber is going to pay for what he's done. In blood. As the sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, two broken people forged a pact in a small cabin far from justice. Neither knew if they would survive what was coming, but both had crossed the line where survival alone was enough. Sometimes Elias thought looking at the determination in Lydia's battered face, dying for the right reason, was the only victory left. The old gravesite was little more than a collection of weathered crosses on a small rise half a mile from the main trail. Most dated back to the early settlement days when Collar had swept through a wagon train headed west. The names had long since faded from the wood, leaving only anonymous markers against the vast indifference of the desert. Lydia moved with painful slowness, but insisted on walking under her own power. They'd waited until dusk when the failing light would make them less visible to any watching eyes. Now, in the purple gloaming, she led Elias to a grave set slightly apart from the others, marked with a cross that leaned drunkenly to one side. "Here," she said, kneeling with a difficulty. "I buried it beneath the southwest corner." Elias dug with his hands, the dry earth giving way easily. 6 inches down, his fingers touched oilcloth. He pulled out a small package, unwrapping it to reveal a leather-bound book about the size of his hand. "This is it?" he asked, turning it over. Lydia nodded. 3 years of names, girls who disappeared, men who bought them places they were sent. Weber's whole operation documented. Elias opened the book, squinting in the fading light to make out the neat, precise handwriting. The first page was a list of names, dates, and amounts paid. Sarah's name leapt out at him from halfway down. S. Blackwood, San Francisco, 150, Camp 7, March 17, 1884. "How did you get all this?" he asked, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "I treated one of Weber's bookkeepers for consumption last winter. He knew he was dying, wanted to clear his conscience." A grim smile touched her lips. Amazing what men will confess when they think God is waiting with a ledger of his own. Elias leafed through the pages, recognizing names of prominent men throughout the territory. Judges, bankers, politicians, men who decided laws and lives, treating women like commodities to be bought and sold. "This would destroy them all," he said quietly. "If anyone would believe it," Lydia countered. "These men own the law in Arizona territory." "Not all the law." Elias tucked the book inside his shirt. "I served with a man named James Cooper. He's a federal marshal now based in Tucson. He doesn't answer to territorial authorities." Hope flickered in Lydia's eyes. "You trust him, Bum, with my life, with Sarah's life." Elias helped her to her feet. "We'll send him a telegram from Redemption tomorrow." As they turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught Elias's eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness near a cluster of rocks. His hand went to his revolver, but too late. "I wouldn't, Blackwood." The voice belonged to a figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, rifle raised and steady. Not Harlan, but someone larger, more substantial. In the dim light, Elias could just make out the features of a man he'd hoped never to see again. "Victorio," he acknowledged, hand still on his holstered gun. "Thought you'd be dead by now." The Apache warrior stepped forward, his face coming into clearer view. Weathered copper skin, sharp eyes that missed nothing, hair streaked with gray but still worn long in the old way. He'd aged since Elias had last seen him across a battlefield, but the years had taken nothing of his dangerous preventative. "Many hoped so," Victorio replied, his English perfect and unaccented. "Many died disappointed." His rifle remained aimed at Elias's chest. "The woman is under my protection now. Step away from her." To Elias's surprise, Lydia moved forward. "He's helping me, Victorio. He's not one of them." The rifle didn't waver. "He hunted my people for 5 years. Why would he help you hunt white men now?" "Because they have his daughter," Lydia said simply. Something flickered in Victorio's eyes, recognition perhaps, or merely calculation. After a long moment, he lowered his rifle slightly. "The missing women," he said. "You found proof?" Lydia nodded. "Names, dates, locations, including women from your people." Victorio's gaze shifted to Elias. "And you believe this changes things between us, Scout?" "I don't care what's between us," Elias replied honestly. "I care about finding my daughter and stopping the men who took her." Another long moment of assessment. Then with fluid grace, Victorio slung his rifle over his shoulder. "My sister's daughter disappeared last summer," he said. "The white sheriff said she ran away with a minor. She was 12 years old. The implications hung in the night air, too monstrous to voice aloud. "We're sending for a federal marshal," Elias said. "With this evidence, he can shut down the whole operation." Victorio's laugh was bitter as desert alkaline. "And how many girls will die while you wait for your law to work? How many will be moved or killed to hide the evidence?" "What do you suggest?" Lydia asked, her voice steady despite her obvious pain and exhaustion. "I suggest we stop asking permission to save our daughters." Victorio's eyes gleamed in the gathering darkness. I have 30 warriors who would die to free their sisters and daughters. How many men do you have, Scout? Just me, Elias admitted. Then the odds are already better than in the old days, Victorio said with a grim smile. Come, both of you, my camp is safer than your cabin, and you, he nodded to Lydia, need medicine stronger than white man's whiskey. As they followed the Apache into the desert night, Elias felt the weight of the book against his chest like a burning coal. In it were the names of men who thought themselves untouchable, men who would kill to keep their secrets. It also held the only clue to his daughter's whereabouts, and the proof of atrocities that would shake the territory to its foundations. What had begun as one woman's quest for justice had become something far larger, a reckoning that would test not just their courage, but the very fabric of law and civilization in the changing West. Behind them, the forgotten graves stood silent witness monuments to lives cut short in a land that gave death more readily than mercy. Ahead lay a path that would lead either to justice or to joining those unmarked crosses on the lonely hill. Elias Blackwood, who had spent a lifetime walking the boundaries between worlds, felt the line shifting beneath his feet once more. This time he knew there would be no going back. The Apache camp was hidden in a narrow canyon that opened into a small valley, invisible from the main trails. Unlike the sprawling encampments of the war years, this was a compact settlement of perhaps 20 lodges arranged with an eye toward quick evacuation if needed. No fires burned to give away their position, only the faint glow of coals inside the lodges providing illumination in the darkness. Silent figures watched their approach, women and children ducking back into lodges, while warriors stood their ground, rifles and bows ready. Elias felt their eyes on him, heavy with memory and distrust. He had been their enemy once, had tracked their movements and guided soldiers to their hiding places. Some of the older men would remember his face. Victorio spoke in rapid Apache, and the tension eased slightly. A woman emerged from the largest lodge, gray-haired but straight-backed, her face a map of lines etched by sun and sorrow. She examined Lydia with professional detachment, then motioned for her to follow inside. My mother will tend to her wounds, Victorio explained. She was a healer before the white man's schools taught your woman their medicine. She's not my woman, Elias corrected, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. Victorio's expression might have been amusement. No, she is her own, a rare thing. He gestured toward a smaller lodge. You will stay there tonight. We will talk in the morning when minds are clear. Elias hesitated. I should stay with her, make sure she's all right. My mother delivered me into this world and has kept me in it despite 7 bullet wounds and 2 arrow strikes. Victorio replied dryly. Think she can manage a few cuts and bruises without your supervision. There was no arguing with that logic. Elias nodded and moved toward the offered lodge, acutely aware of the eyes that followed him, the whispers that trailed in his wake. He was in a place where his name was spoken with hatred among people who had every reason to want him dead. Yet they had offered shelter if not welcome. The world was changing indeed. Inside the small lodge, a bed of blankets had been arranged on one side, a small fire pit in the center, providing minimal warmth. Elias sat cross-legged on the blankets, the black book open in his hands, studying the names and dates by the dim light. Sarah's entry burned into his vision each time he returned to it. 4 months at Camp 7. Was she still alive? Had she endured what Lydia described the breaking process that turned free women into compliant slaves? The thought of his strong-willed, intelligent daughter reduced to such a state made his hands shake with rage. Sarah had her mother's spirit, the same fierce independence that had drawn Elias to his wife all those years ago. Margaret had died of fever when Sarah was just 16, leaving Elias to raise a daughter he barely understood. They'd clashed often, 2 stubborn natures butting heads, but beneath it all had been love and respect. When she'd announced her plan to seek work in San Francisco, he'd been hurt but not surprised. She'd always wanted more than a ranch in the middle of nowhere could offer. Now he wondered if their arguments had pushed her away, made her vulnerable to whatever scheme had led her into Weber's clutches. Had she been trying to prove something? Or simply trying to escape a father whose silences spoke of disappointments he never actually felt? A soft sound at the lodge entrance broke his reverie. Lydia stood there, her face cleaner than before, her wounds dressed with poultices that filled the air with a sharp herbal scent. She wore a simple buckskin dress, her own clothes presumably too damaged to salvage. May I come in? She asked, her voice stronger than it had been that morning. Elias nodded, closing the book and setting it aside. She moved with less pain than before, settling onto the blankets opposite him, with only a slight wince. The old woman has remarkable skill, she said, answering his unasked question. Some of her remedies are more effective than anything I learned in medical school. You went to medical school? A small smile touched her lips. For a year, until they remembered I was a woman and suggested nursing would be more appropriate. but I learned enough to recognize good medicine when I see it. Elias studied her in the dim light. The bruises on her face were covered with some kind of paste, the cuts cleaned and dressed. Her eyes were clear now, alert and intelligent. It was easier to see the woman she had been before Weber's attack composed determined someone who had dedicated her life to healing others. "Why didn't you tell me you knew Victorio?" he asked. "I treated his people at my clinic, those who were afraid to go to the reservation doctor or couldn't afford the town physician." She shrugged slightly. He didn't approve at first, thought I might be poisoning them, but after a while he saw I was genuinely trying to help. "He hates me," Elias observed. "He hated the scout who tracked his people. He's reserving judgment on the man who wants to save his niece." She glanced at the book beside him. "Did you find Sarah's entry?" Elias nodded. "Camp 7 4 months ago, but no indication of what happened after. The most recent entries are from 2 weeks ago. Weber was updating the book regularly." "And you stole it." "I copied it first," Lydia corrected, "page by page over several nights while treating as bookkeeper. The original is probably still in Weber's office. This is my version." Elias looked at her with new respect. "You were planning this for a long time." "Since Ruth disappeared. 5 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Her voice was steady, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "She was going to be a teacher, had a position, waiting at a school in California. She stopped in Redemption on her way west, wrote me that she'd met a charming man who was offering girls good wages to work for the railroad." "Weber," Lydia nodded, "though I didn't know his name then. Just that my sister, who wrote to me every week without fail, suddenly stopped writing. The local sheriff said the same thing they always say: she probably ran off with a man or changed her mind about teaching. No one would investigate. So you came west yourself." "Took some time to arrange. I was working at a hospital in Boston then. Had to save money, find a replacement." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "By the time I got here, the trail was cold. But then other girls started disappearing, and I began to see the pattern." Elias leaned forward. "This Camp 7, you said you found it. Do you know exactly where it is?" "In a canyon about 30 miles northwest. Heavily guarded. They have men with rifles at the only entrance, and the walls are too steep to climb." She met his eyes directly. "Even with Victorio's warriors, a frontal assault would be suicide." "There's always a back door," Elias said, the scout in him already analyzing possibilities. "No canyon is completely sealed." "Perhaps, but there's something else you should know." Lydia hesitated. "Weber isn't working alone. According to his bookkeeper, he answers to someone higher up, a major investor in the railroad with political connections." "Who?" He didn't know a name, just that Weber reports to someone in Washington, someone powerful enough to make entire investigations disappear. The implications were staggering. If the corruption reached all the way to Washington, then even a federal marshal might not be enough. They were fighting something larger than one man's depravity. They were challenging a system that treated human beings as commodities to be exploited for profit and pleasure. "We need to be smarter than them," Elias said finally. "We need to hit them where it hurts most." "The money," Lydia agreed. "Without the girls, the operation collapses. And we need to expose the men who use them, all of them." Elias tapped the book. "This is our weapon. We just need to figure out how to use it most effectively." Lydia studied him with a doctor's assessing gaze. "You're different than I expected. The stories about you during the Apache Wars were mostly true." Elias finished for her. "I was a different man then, younger, angrier. The war had taken too much from me, and I needed someone to blame. And now I'm old enough to know better, but still young enough to do something about it." He met her gaze steadily. "I can't change what I did then, but maybe I can balance the scales a little now." Lydia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "We should rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough." As she settled onto her side of the blankets, Elias remained sitting, watching the embers of the small fire. Outside, he could hear the soft movements of the camp mothers, soothing children, murmured conversations, the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. A community living on borrowed time in a land that no longer had room for their way of life. Yet they had taken in 2 strangers, one a former enemy, because of a shared pain, the loss of daughters to men who saw human beings as property. It was a bond that transcended the boundaries of race and history, a common cause in a world that seemed increasingly governed by greed rather than justice. Elias Blackwood had spent his life crossing borders between North and South during the war between white and Indian worlds, after it between civilization and wilderness as the frontier slowly disappeared. Now he found himself at another crossing point, facing a choice between acceptance of the world as it was or a stand against the darkness that threatened to consume it. He thought of Sarah somewhere in that darkness, perhaps believing her father had abandoned her. He thought of Ruth Collins and all the other names in that small black book. And he knew that whatever came next, victory or defeat, life or death, there was only one path his conscience would allow. As dawn broke over the hidden Apache camp, a plan began to form in his mind, a dangerous gambit that would require perfect timing, absolute trust, and more than a little luck. But first they needed information that only one man could provide. Tomorrow, Elias Blackwood would return to redemption for the first time in 6 months. And Samuel Weber would discover that some ghosts from the past refused to stay buried. The town of Redemption had grown since Elias last walked its dusty main street. New buildings lined the thoroughfare, a two-story hotel with actual glass windows, a bank with a brick facade, even a photographer's studio offering modern portraits for the modern age. Progress driven by the silver from nearby mines and the promise of the railroad's imminent arrival. Elias kept his hat pulled low, his steps unhurried as he took the measure of the place. No one paid much attention to another weathered man in trail-worn clothes, just another rancher come to town for supplies, or perhaps to waste his hard-earned dollars at the Silver Bell Saloon. The saloon was his destination, though not for whiskey. James Cooper had telegraphed back within hours of receiving Elias's message, "Meet at Silver Bell. Noon. Come armed, trust no one." It was 11:30 now. Elias positioned himself at the far end of the bar, back to the wall, ordering coffee rather than liquor. He needed a clear head. The bartender, a new man Elias didn't recognize, raised an eyebrow, but asked no questions. In the West, a man's choice of drink was his own business. The saloon was half full, mostly miners and cowboys killing time before their next shift. A piano player tinkered half-heartedly with a tune Elias vaguely recognized from the war years, something about a girl waiting faithfully at home. He'd heard men sing it around campfires before battles, their voices carrying the desperate hope that someone somewhere would mourn if they didn't return. "Didn't think I'd see you back in civilization, Blackwood." The voice belonged to a broad-shouldered man sliding onto the bar stool beside him. James Cooper had aged well in the decades since Elias had last seen him. The federal marshal's badge gleamed against his black vest, worn openly rather than concealed. Cooper wasn't a man who hid his authority. "Didn't think I'd need to come back," Elias replied quietly. "Things change." Cooper nodded to the bartender for coffee of his own. "Your telegram was light on details, just that you had evidence of kidnapping and needed federal help." "Not here," Elias murmured, noting two men at a nearby table showing too much interest in their conversation. "Walk with me after." They sat in silence for several minutes, two old soldiers sharing the unspoken language of men who had seen too much of the world's darkness. Cooper had been a Union captain when Elias served as scout, a fair man who treated his troops well and followed orders without question until those orders conflicted with his sense of right and wrong. He'd risked court-martial once to countermand an order that would have sent his men into a Confederate trap. That decision had saved 30 lives, including Elias's. "You still in touch with that Apache woman?" Cooper asked suddenly, his voice low. "The one who patched you up after Skeleton Canyon." Elias tensed. "Lydia Collins isn't Apache. She was an Army nurse." Cooper's eyes narrowed. "I know who Lydia Collins is. I'm asking about the other one, the healer." Understanding dawned. Cooper was warning him someone was listening, perhaps watching. The mention of an Apache woman was code, a reference to a mission they'd shared where an Apache healer had saved Elias's life after a skirmish. "Lost track of her years ago," Elias replied evenly. "Why?" "Just curious. She saved your hide once. Thought maybe she could do it again." Cooper drained his coffee and stood. "Think I'll get some air before the lunch crowd arrives. Place gets too damn noisy for business." Elias waited 3 minutes, then followed. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly, the temperature already climbing past 90 degrees, though it wasn't yet noon. Cooper was nowhere in sight, but Elias knew where to go. They'd established fallback locations during the war habits that died hard. The livery stable at the edge of town was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. Cooper stood beside a stall, stroking the nose of a chestnut mare, as if considering a purchase. The stable hand was nowhere to be seen. "Paid him to take a break," Cooper explained, seeing Elias's questioning look. "Now talk fast, you're being watched." "By whom?" "Weber's men. 2 in the saloon, probably more on the street. He knows you're back in town." Cooper's expression was grim. "What the hell have you stepped in Blackwood?" Elias gave him the bare outline, Lydia's discovery. Weber's attacked the black book documenting years of trafficking. He mentioned Sarah's name among the victims, saw the shock and then rage flash across Cooper's features. "Jesus," Cooper breathed when Elias finished. "I knew there were rumors about missing girls, but this?" "Can you help?" Elias asked bluntly. Cooper ran a hand through his graying hair. Officially, it's complicated. Weber has friends in high places, all the way to the governor's office. Any investigation would need ironclad evidence and witnesses willing to testify. We have the book, which you stole, making it inadmissible in court, and Weber will claim it's a forgery. Cooper shook his head. Don't get me wrong, I believe you, but the law requires more than belief. Then what do you suggest? Elias felt a familiar anger rising. Let them continue while we build a case. How many more girls disappear in the meantime? Cooper glanced toward the stable entrance, ensuring they were still alone. Off the record, I've been investigating Weber for months, not for trafficking, for land fraud. He's been forcing ranchers off their property along the proposed railroad route using forged documents and threats. I was building a case to take to the federal prosecutor in Tucson. Land fraud gets attention, missing women don't. Elias couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. It's not right, but it's reality, Cooper admitted. But if we can get him on the land charges, we can search his properties, find evidence of the other crimes. Do this legally, Elias, the right way. My daughter doesn't have time for the right way. Cooper's eyes softened. I'm sorry about Sarah, truly. But going in guns blazing will just get you killed, and any survivors move somewhere will never find them. Deep down, Elias knew Cooper was right. Victorio's warriors might get them into Camp 7, but what then? Even if they freed everyone, Weber would escape protected by his connections. And those connections would ensure the survivors were portrayed as criminals, their rescuers as murderers. What about the Apache girl? Cooper asked. Victorio's niece. That changes things, crosses state lines, involves reservation land. Gives me more jurisdiction. Elias considered this. You think you could get a warrant based on her disappearance? Maybe, especially if Victorio would testify. Cooper's expression was doubtful, though I can't imagine him walking into a white man's court. He might for his niece. Elias wasn't sure of this, but he needed to give Cooper something to work with. How long would it take? To get a federal warrant, a week, maybe 2. I'd have to wire Judge Parsons in Tucson, present evidence. 2 weeks, too long. Sarah had already endured 4 months in that place. Ruth Collins even longer. We'll try it your way, Elias said finally, but I need something from you first. Name it. Information on Camp 7, security layout, number of guards. And I need to know who's above Weber, who's he working for. Cooper hesitated. I don't know much about the camp. It's not on any official maps. As for who's above Weber, he lowered his voice further. Senator Hollister, chairman of the Western Territories Committee, major investor in the railroad. He's coming to Redemption next week for the groundbreaking ceremony. Hollister. The name struck Elias like a physical blow. Not just any senator, but one of the most powerful men in Washington, a Civil War hero turned politician, rumored to be on the short list for a cabinet position in the next administration. You're sure? Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. Cooper nodded grimly. I've seen correspondence between them. Weber reports directly to him, calls him the director. Everything Weber does, he does with Hollister's knowledge and approval. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The railroad wasn't just about connecting cities or transporting goods. It was about power, about controlling who went where and what they carried, including human cargo. The groundbreaking, Elias mused. Hollister will be here in person, along with the governor, newspaper reporters, railroad executives. Very public event. Cooper's eyes narrowed. Whatever you're thinking, stop. You can't touch Hollister. He travels with armed guards, has friends in every branch of government. I'm not planning to touch him, just to expose him. A strategy was forming in Elias's mind, dangerous, but potentially effective. If we could get proof to those reporters, the book testimony from survivors. You'd never get close enough, Cooper interrupted. And even if you did, who'd believe you over a decorated senator? You'd be labeled a lunatic, arrested before you could say a word. Then we need more than the book. We need irrefutable evidence. Elias straightened, decision made. We need to find Camp 7. Cooper gripped his arm. Don't. If Weber's men don't kill you, the guards at the camp will. Wait for the warrant. Do this right. I'm just going to look, Elias lied smoothly. Scout the location, gather information for when your warrant comes through. No engagement. Wow, Cooper clearly didn't believe him, but recognized the futility of argument. 2 weeks, Elias. Give me that long. If I don't have a warrant by then, I'll help you take the camp myself. It was a concession, if not the one Elias wanted. He nodded agreement, though they both knew he wouldn't wait if an opportunity presented itself sooner. As they prepared to leave separately, Cooper handed Elias a folded piece of paper. Directions to Camp 7, best as I know them, and a list of Weber's known associates in town. Trust none of them. Elias tucked the paper into his shirt. Watch your back, James. If they're watching me, they're watching you too. Cooper's smile was tight. Been watched before. Comes with the badge. He clasped Elias's shoulder briefly. God help those bastards if they've hurt Sarah. But remember, she needs her father alive, not dead in a heroic last stand. With that sobering reminder, Cooper left first, striding purposefully toward the center of town where his office was located. Elias waited 5 minutes, then slipped out the back of the stable, taking a circuitous route toward the general store. He had supplies to purchase and information to gather. What he didn't know was that he was already too late. By the time Elias returned to the Apache camp, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hidden valley. He'd taken extra precautions, circling back several times to ensure he wasn't followed, even switching horses at a small farm owned by an old friend who asked no questions. The atmosphere in the camp had changed. There was tension in the air. Warriors moving with purposeful strides between lodges, women packing possessions as if preparing to flee. Victorio met him at the edge of the encampment, face like stone. "Where is Lydia?" Elias asked, immediately scanning the area for any sign of her. "Inside with my mother." Victorio's voice was cold. "You were followed." Elias stiffened. "Impossible. I took every precaution." "Not from town. Before. When you came here first." Victorio gestured toward a small group of warriors standing guard over a bound figure seated on the ground. "This one tracked you from the gravesite. Weber's man." Elias approached the prisoner, recognizing him as one of the men from the saloon who had been watching his conversation with Cooper. The man's face was bruised, his expression defiant despite his bound hands. "How long were you following us?" Elias demanded. The man spat on the ground. "Long enough, traitor. Weber knows you're working with the Apache, knows you've got the woman in the book." A malicious smile spread across his battered face. "He says to tell you he's looking forward to reuniting you with your daughter." Cold fear washed through Elias. "What does that mean?" "Means she's been asking for her daddy. Every time they hurt her, she calls for you." The man's smile widened. "Won't be long now before she stops calling." They never last once they lose hope. Elias's fist connected with the man's jaw before he consciously decided to strike the impact, sending the bound figure sprawling in the dust. Victorio's hand on his arm prevented a second blow. "He is trying to make you angry, to make you reckless." The Apache's voice was steady. "We need information, not blood." "Not yet." Forcing his rage under control, Elias stepped back. "What else did he tell you?" "That Weber knows of this place, that men are coming tonight to burn it, to kill everyone." Victorio's expression remained impassive. "We are preparing to move." "Where?" "A place deeper in the mountains, safer." Victorio studied Elias carefully. "You found your marshal friend." Elias nodded quickly, relating his conversation with Cooper, including the revelation about Senator Hollister. Victorio listened without interruption, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. 2 weeks, he said when Elias finished. "Too long." "I know, but Cooper's right about one thing: going in without a plan is suicide." Elias glanced toward the prisoner. "Did he say anything about Camp 7's security layout, number of guards?" "Some, enough to know it is well defended." Victorio turned away. "Come, we will talk inside, away from his ears." Inside Victorio's lodge, Lydia was seated beside the old woman who had treated her wounds, both of them grinding herbs in stone mortars. Lydia looked up as they entered, relief evident in her face. "I was worried," she said simply. "We need to move," Elias replied. "Weber's men found the camp. They're coming tonight." The old woman continued her work without pausing, as if the threat of imminent attack was nothing unusual. Perhaps for her it wasn't. She had lived through decades of persecution, had seen her people driven from their lands again and again. Victorio spoke to her in Apache, then turned to Elias and Lydia. "My mother will finish preparing her medicines. We leave in 1 hour." "Wait," Lydia interjected. "What about the prisoner? What he told you about Sarah and the others?" Victorio's expression darkened. "He says women at the camp are being prepared for transport. A train car arrives tomorrow to take them north to another location. Weber fears exposure after your escape, wants to move his operation." Elias felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath him. "Tomorrow Cooper's warrant won't come for 2 weeks. "Then we cannot wait for your white man's law," Victorio stated flatly. "We must act tonight." "Against a fortified position with how many guards?" Elias shook his head. "It would be a massacre. We have faced worse odds. And your people have paid the price." Elias met the Apache leader's gaze directly. "I want to save Sarah as much as you want to save your niece. But we need a better plan than a frontal assault." Lydia had been silent, her expression thoughtful. Now she spoke up. "What if we don't attack the camp directly? What if we intercept the train instead?" Both men turned to her, considering the suggestion. Easier to attack a moving target than a fortified position, Elias acknowledged. But we'd need to know exactly when and where the train will be. The prisoner might know, Lydia suggested. Or he might lie, you'll lead us into a trap. Victorio's skepticism was evident. Then we need someone inside Camp 7, Elias said slowly, an idea taking shape. Someone who can signal us when the women are being moved and give us the exact time and location. Lydia's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. No, absolutely not. If Weber sees you, he'll kill you on sight. He won't see me. Elias turned to Victorio. Your men can make a person disappear, make them look like someone else. Victorio studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. It can be done, but it is dangerous. If you are discovered. I know the risks, Elias's voice was firm. But it's our best chance to free everyone before they're moved beyond our reach. You would need a way in, Victorio pointed out, a reason to be admitted to the camp. I have one. Elias reached inside his shirt, withdrawing the black book. Weber wants this more than he wants me dead. I can pose as a bounty hunter who found it on Lydia's body, come to collect the reward. And when you're inside, Lydia asked, fear evident in her voice, I find Sarah and the others learn the transport details and signal your warriors when to strike the train. Elias made it sound simpler than he knew it would be. With Cooper's information and what the prisoner told you, I can navigate the camp. Victorio considered the plan, then spoke to his mother in Apache. The old woman responded at length, her voice carrying the weight of authority despite its age. Finally, Victorio turned back to Elias. My mother says you will need medicine, to change your scent so the dogs do not recognize you, and to give you strength for what is to come. His expression softened slightly. She also says you are either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. Tell her I've been called worse, Elias replied with grim humor. As they finalized the details of their desperate plan, the camp around them prepared for evacuation. Warriors would escort the women, children, and elders to the new hiding place, while Victorio and 20 of his best fighters would remain behind to assist in the train interception. Lydia worked with the old woman, preparing the herbal concoctions that would alter Elias's appearance and mask his scent. She moved with the efficiency of a trained medical professional, but he could see the worry in her eyes each time she glanced his way. I'll be careful, he told her quietly when they had a moment alone. This isn't about careful, she replied, her hands steady as she mixed a dark paste. This is about walking into the devil's house and hoping he doesn't recognize you. I've done it before. In war, with an army behind you. She set down the mortar, meeting his eyes directly. I've seen what Weber does to people who cross him. If he realizes who you are, then Victorio attacks the camp directly and you get as many people out as you can. Elias's voice was matter of fact. Cooper knows enough to continue the investigation, expose Hollister eventually. And Sarah Ruth, all the others? One problem at a time. He tried to sound more confident than he felt. This will work, Lydia. It has to. She studied him for a long moment, then reached up to touch his face gently, her fingers cool against his weathered skin. You're a good man, Elias Blackwood. Better than the stories say. The stories tell their own truths, he replied, thinking of all the lives his actions had ended or ruined during the Apache Wars. But I'm trying to write a different ending this time. An hour later, Elias Blackwood looked in the small mirror Lydia held up and barely recognized himself. His hair and beard were darkened with walnut dye. His skin altered with a mixture that made it appear more weathered and slightly darker in tone. A scar, not real but convincing, ran from his temple to his jaw on the right side, changing the symmetry of his features. Most remarkable was the change in his eyes, achieved with a carefully applied herbal solution that stung like fire but turned his blue irises to a muddy brown. Will it fool Weber? He asked Victorio, who had overseen the transformation. From a distance, yes. Up close. The Apache shrugged. It depends on how well he knew your face and how observant he is. The scent will confuse the dogs, which is more important. Elias nodded, memorizing his new appearance. He would travel through the night, reaching the vicinity of Camp 7 by dawn. The plan called for him to approach openly, presenting himself as a bounty hunter named Thomas Reed, who had tracked Lydia Collins, killed her, and recovered the book she had stolen. The real Reed was a notorious figure in the territories, a man who hunted humans with the same dispassion others reserved for game animals. If Weber believes you, he will want to verify the woman's death himself, Victorio warned. He will ask for proof. Elias patted the saddlebag where a blood-stained piece of Lydia's dress was stored along with a lock of her hair. I have what I need. Lydia had given both, willingly understanding the necessity. She would remain with the Apache women and children, protected from Weber's men and positioned to provide medical care to any wounded during the coming confrontation. As Elias prepared to depart, Victorio approached with a final offering, a necklace made of leather cord with a small stone pendant. Apache medicine, he explained, placing it around Elias's neck, to protect the spirit when entering dark places. The gesture surprised Elias. I thought you hated me for what I did during the wars. Hate is a luxury for those with time to waste, Victorio replied simply. We face the same enemy now. Perhaps the Great Spirit has a sense of humor, bringing us together in this way. Or perhaps Elias thought, but did not say, there was a certain justice in it that he who had once hunted Victorio's people would now risk his life to save one of them. Redemption came in strange forms sometimes. He mounted the horse they had prepared for him, not his own, which might be recognized, but a paint gelding with distinctive markings that would suit his new identity. The animal snorted and sidestepped, sensing the tension in the air. I'll signal with a fire when I have the information, Elias confirmed. 3 columns of smoke visible from the ridge to the east of the camp. Victorio nodded. We will be watching. If you are not out by sunset tomorrow, then don't wait. Proceed with the attack on the train based on the prisoner's information. Elias adjusted his hat pulled low to shadow his face. And tell her yourself when you return, Victorio interrupted. Words spoken before battle have a way of becoming final. Save yours for victory. With that wisdom echoing in his mind, Elias Blackwood rode into the darkness, leaving behind the relative safety of the Apache camp. Ahead lay Camp 7, where his daughter had endured 4 months of captivity, where dozens of women were held against their will, where Samuel Weber's reign of terror was about to face its first real challenge. As the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of hours, Elias mentally prepared himself for the role he would play. Thomas Reed, bounty hunter. A man without conscience or compunction, the kind of predator Weber would recognize as a kindred spirit. He needed to become that man, to think as Reed would think, to see the world through those cold, calculating eyes. By dawn, when the harsh outline of Camp 7 appeared on the horizon, Elias Blackwood had vanished, locked away inside his own mind. In his place rode a killer, a man who hunted humans for profit and felt nothing when he collected his blood money. The deception that would save lives or end his own had begun. Camp 7 emerged from the morning mist like something from a nightmare. A compound of rough wooden buildings surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire. The whole structure wedged into a narrow canyon whose walls rose steep and unforgiving on 3 sides. A single dirt road led to a gate guarded by men with rifles, their postures suggesting both boredom and brutality. Above the gate, a crude wooden sign displayed only the number 7 in faded red paint that looked uncomfortably like dried blood in the early light. Thomas Reed now approached at an unhurried pace, his posture that of a man accustomed to being feared rather than welcomed. He counted 4 guards at the gate, another 2 patrolling the fence line, and at least 1 sniper positioned on a wooden platform overlooking the compound. More than expected, suggesting Weber valued whatever or whoever was kept inside. That's far enough, called one of the gate guards as Elias drew within 50 yards. The man raised his rifle, not quite aiming, but making the threat clear. State your business. Reed, Elias replied, his voice deliberately roughened the timbre, different from his natural speech. Thomas Reed, I'm here to see Weber. The name had an immediate effect. The guard's posture stiffened, and the other men exchanged glances that mixed recognition with unease. Reed's reputation preceded him, a hunter of men, who brought in his targets dead more often than alive, a ghost that materialized from the wilderness, with blood on his hands and scalps in his saddlebags. Mr. Weber ain't expecting visitors, the guard said, his earlier confidence wavering. He'll see me. Elias patted the saddlebag where the black book was hidden. Got something that belongs to him. Something he'll pay good money to get back. The guard hesitated, then motioned to one of his companions, who disappeared through a smaller side gate. 5 tense minutes passed before the man returned, accompanied by a figure Elias recognized immediately despite the years since their last encounter. Harlan had aged poorly, his thin frame now gaunt, his face creased with lines that spoke of hard living and harder decisions. The deputy's badge still gleamed on his chest, incongruous against the backdrop of this illegal prison camp. Reed, Harlan acknowledged, eyes narrowed as he studied the newcomer. Didn't know you operated in these parts. I operate wherever the money is, Elias replied coldly. And I hear Weber's offering a handsome sum for a certain nurse and a book she stole. Interest sharpened Harlan's gaze. You found Lydia Collins. Found her. Dealt with her. Elias produced a blood-stained scrap of dress fabric from his saddlebag. Got this as proof, and the book she was so desperate to protect. Harlan stepped closer, examining the fabric, then glanced up with something like respect in his eyes. Weber will want to see this for himself and verify the book's authenticity. That's why I'm here, to collect my reward from the man himself. After another moment's consideration, Harlan nodded to the guards. Let him through. Search him first. Elias submitted to the search with the impatient tolerance of a predator momentarily inconvenienced. They took his guns, the Springfield rifle, and a Colt revolver, but missed the knife hidden in his boot. A cursory inspection of his saddlebags revealed the black book, which Harlan examined briefly before returning it. Follow me, the deputy ordered, leading the way into the compound. Inside Camp 7 revealed itself as a place designed to break spirits as much as imprison bodies. A central yard of hard-packed dirt was bordered by 3 long, low buildings, barracks of some kind, with barred windows and padlocked doors. Women in ragged clothes worked under armed guard, carrying water-chopping wood, performing the labor that kept the camp functioning. Their faces were uniformly gaunt, their movements mechanical, eyes downcast, as if looking up might invite punishment. Elias scanned their faces as surreptitiously as possible, searching for Sarah or Ruth among them. None matched his memory of his daughter, nor Lydia's description of her sister. Either they were inside the barracks, or they had already been moved. Harlan led him to a 4th building, set apart from the others, a 2-story structure with a covered porch that might have been mistaken for a ranch house under different circumstances. This would be the administrative center where Weber and his men conducted their business. Inside, the contrast with the rest of the camp was stark. Fine furnishings, carpets, even artwork on the walls spoke of wealth and cultivation strangely at odds with the brutality outside. A young woman in a plain black dress served coffee from a silver service, her movements as mechanical as those of the laborers in the yard, her mind never rising to meet those of the men she served. Wait here, Harlan instructed, gesturing to a chair before disappearing through a door at the back of the room. Elias remained standing, using the opportunity to study his surroundings. Maps on one wall showed the railroad's planned route with Camp 7 marked as a small red dot along a spur line. Penciled notations indicated dates and numbers, shipments received and sent perhaps. A desk in one corner held ledgers and correspondence too distant to read, but likely containing valuable evidence. Most telling was a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, Senator Hollister standing beside a younger Samuel Weber, both men smiling, their hands clasped in the politician's trademark campaign pose. The image confirmed Cooper's information about the connection between the two men. The door opened, and Samuel Weber himself emerged, followed closely by Harlan. At 50, Weber retained the powerful build of his younger years, his tailored suit doing little to disguise the strength in his shoulders and arms. His face was handsome in a conventional way, distinguished by a well-trimmed beard now silver at the edges and eyes the pale blue of winter ice. Those eyes fixed on Elias with calculating assessment. Mr. Reed, Weber said, his voice cultured, almost gentle. Deputy Harlan tells me you have brought something of value to me. Depends on what you consider valuable, Elias replied, maintaining Reed's rough persona. I've got the book your nurse stole and proof she won't be stealing anything else. Weber smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. May I see both? Elias removed the black book from his saddlebag, along with the bloodied fabric and lock of Lydia's hair. He placed them on a small table, then stepped back, watching Weber's reaction carefully. The man examined the fabric first, rubbing it between his fingers with disturbing intimacy. This is indeed from the dress she was wearing when we last spoke. He set it aside and picked up the book, leafing through its pages with the familiarity of its author. And this appears to be complete. No pages removed or altered. Then I'll take my reward and be on my way, Elias said, purposely brusque. $500 was the figure mentioned. Weber closed the book, studying Elias with renewed interest. You misunderstand, Mr. Reed. I haven't verified the woman's death yet. Only the authenticity of these items, which could have been taken without killing her. You calling me a liar? Elias allowed danger to edge his voice. I'm calling you a businessman, as am I. Weber smiled again, cold and precise. I'll pay half now, half when I've confirmed Miss Collins is indeed dead. That seems fair, doesn't it? It was a test, Elias realized. Reed was known for his temper as much as his tracking skills. A too easy acceptance would raise suspicion. I don't work on consignment, Elias growled. I delivered what you asked for. The woman's dead, buried in the desert where no one will find her. You want to dig up her corpse, that's your business, but I expect payment in full before I tell you where. Weber's smile widened fractionally, apparently satisfied with the response. You have a reputation for directness, Mr. Reed. Very well, he turned to Harlan. Pay him the $500, in gold, as I'm sure he prefers. As Harlan moved to a safe in the corner, Weber gestured to the coffee service. While we wait, perhaps you'd care for refreshment. You've come a long way. I don't drink coffee, Elias lied, not trusting anything offered in this place. A man of caution. I respect that. Weber sat in a leather armchair, motioning for Elias to take the one opposite. Tell me, how did you find her? My men have been searching for weeks. I have my methods. Elias remained deliberately vague. Picked up her trail near the Apache territory. She'd been moving at night, staying off the main trails. Amateur mistakes. And she didn't tell you anything before she died? About why she stole the book, perhaps? Or who she planned to share it with? The question carried dangerous undercurrents. If Weber suspected Lydia had confederates, he might already be setting traps. She begged, Elias said flatly. Offered money, her body information, the usual. I wasn't interested in her stories, just the bounty. Weber studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if satisfied. A professional perspective, admirable in its way. Harlan returned with a leather pouch that clinked heavily as he set it on the table. 500 in double eagles, as requested. Elias made no move to take it. I want to see them counted. A flicker of annoyance crossed Weber's face, quickly masked. Of course. Harlan, if you would. As the deputy began counting gold coins onto the table, a commotion erupted outside, shouting the sound of running feet. A woman's scream cut short. Weber rose, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a much younger man. Ah, he said, sounding almost pleased. It seems we have another discipline issue. Perhaps you'd care to observe Mr. Reed. It might interest you professionally to see how we maintain order here. It was another test, Elias realized. Weber was evaluating his reaction, looking for any sign of sympathy that would betray his disguise. He forced himself to shrug with Reed's characteristic indifference to suffering. Seen plenty of discipline in my time, he said, affecting boredom. But if it delays my payment, lead the way. Weber's eyes glinted with something like approval. Bring the gold, Harlan. Mr. Reed can count it while we attend to this matter. They followed Weber into the yard where a small crowd had gathered around one of the barracks. Two guards dragged a struggling woman between them, her face hidden by long matted hair, her clothes torn from her efforts to break free. What's the infraction? Weber asked one of the guards, his tone conversational, as if inquiring about the weather. Tried to hide food, sir, the man replied. Second offense. I see. Weber sighed a parody of regret. You know the consequences for a second offense, my dear. The woman's struggles intensified, her strangled sounds, suggesting a gag of some kind, prevented her from speaking. As the guards forced her to her knees, her hair fell back from her face and Elias felt his blood freeze in his veins. Sarah, his daughter, knelt in the dirt, eyes wild with fear and defiance, a dirty cloth tied around her mouth. She was thinner than he remembered, her face gaunt, but unmistakably Sarah. It took every ounce of will he possessed not to reach for the knife in his boot, not to kill Weber where he stood. Mr. Reed, Weber said, watching him closely, would you do us the honor? A demonstration of your skills would be most educational for our charges. Elias stared at him, momentarily uncomprehending, until Weber gestured to a whip one of the guards held extended toward him. 10 lashes is our standard for a second offense, Weber explained as if discussing a business transaction. But in the hands of an expert, I'm told 5 can be equally effective. It was the final test and a trap sprung with elegant cruelty. If Elias refused, his cover would be blown. If he accepted, he would have to whip his own daughter, whose recognition of him might betray them both at any moment. For an eternal second, he considered abandoning the plan, reaching for his hidden knife, trying to kill Weber and as many guards as possible before they cut him down. But then what would happen to Sarah? To all the women imprisoned here? I don't work for free, he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. The discipline of your property isn't my concern. Weber's expression showed a flicker of disappointment. A matter of professional pride, perhaps. I've heard your skill with a whip is unmatched in the territories. You heard wrong. I use a gun. Cleaner, faster. Elias nodded toward the still kneeling Sarah. But if you're offering a bonus to the 500, relief washed across Weber's face, quickly concealed. A negotiation. I respect that. Let's say an additional 50 for the demonstration. Make it 100. Done. Weber's smile returned, apparently reassured by Elias's mercenary response. He turned to the guard. Give Mr. Reed the whip. Clear some space. As the whip was placed in his hand, Elias felt Sarah's eyes on him. There was no recognition yet, the disguise holding, or perhaps her fear too great for clear perception. He had seconds to decide how to proceed, how to administer punishment severe enough to satisfy Weber without truly harming his daughter. The crowd formed a circle, the other women forced to watch a lesson in the consequences of disobedience. Harlan stood to one side, hand on his gun, watching Elias with narrowed eyes. Weber positioned himself directly opposite his expression, anticipatory, almost eager. Elias moved behind Sarah, uncoiling the whip with practiced motions that belied the turmoil in his mind. He had used such implements during the war, but never for torture, only for driving supply wagons through difficult terrain. Yet he knew the technique, understood the physics of the lash. Remove her shirt, Weber instructed a guard. Bare skin makes for more effective lessons. The guard complied, cutting away the back of Sarah's already tattered dress to expose skin marked with previous beatings, some healed to scars, others still raw. The sight nearly broke Elias's control, but he maintained Reed's impassive expression through sheer force of will. He raised the whip, calculating angles, force positioning. There was a way to do this to make it look and sound worse than it was, to create the illusion of severe punishment while minimizing actual damage. The key was precision control and Sarah's cooperation, though she couldn't know to provide it. The first lash cracked through the air, the sound shocking in the sudden silence of the yard. Elias had aimed to strike the ground inches from Sarah's back, creating a loud report without contact. But at the last moment, she flinched, moving directly into the path of the descending whip. The leather connected with her shoulder, drawing a line of blood, and a muffled scream through the gag. Elias felt sick, his hands suddenly unsteady. 4 more to go, and he had already failed to protect her. "Excellent form, Mr. Reed," Weber called, his voice carrying a disturbing undercurrent of pleasure. "Though perhaps a bit tentative, I was led to believe you were more decisive." The taunt steadied him, anger providing clarity where guilt threatened paralysis. Elias adjusted his stance, recalculated. The next lash would have to connect. Weber was watching too closely, but he could control where and how severely. He brought the whip down again, this time purposely striking across an area already marked with healed scars, where the nerves would be less sensitive. Sarah jerked and cried out, but the wound was superficial, more dramatic than damaging. For the third stroke, he used a technique he'd seen cavalry officers employ during the war, a motion that produced a fearsome sound and a stinging blow but dispersed the force across a wider area, minimizing tissue damage. Sarah's reaction was appropriately agonized, convincing to observers who expected to see pain. 2 more bao, Weber announced, sounding disappointed that the spectacle would soon end. Elias met Sarah's eyes briefly as he circled to approach from a different angle. Something flickered in her gaze, confusion, perhaps a dawning recognition. He looked away quickly, focusing on the final strokes, each carefully calculated to maximize sound and appearance while minimizing harm. When it was done, Sarah slumped forward, supported only by the guard's grip on her arms. Blood trickled down her back in thin rivulets, but Elias knew with professional certainty that none of the wounds were deep enough to cause lasting damage. Small comfort given that he had inflicted them himself. "Impressive control," Weber commented as Elias handed the whip back to the guard. "Though I confess I expected more enthusiasm." "I told you it's not my preferred method." Elias kept his voice cold, disinterested. "You got what you paid for. Now about the rest of my money." Weber studied him for a long moment, then nodded to Harlan. "Take Mr. Reed back to the office to conclude our business. Have the girl return to the isolation cell. No food for 3 days." As Harlan led him away, Elias risked one final glance back at Sarah. Her head was down, hair hiding her face, but her posture had changed subtly. Straight back, despite the pain, a deliberate strength replacing the earlier terror. She knew. Somehow, despite the disguise, despite the circumstances, she had recognized her father. The question was whether anyone else had noticed the recognition pass between them. Back in Weber's office, Harlan finished counting out the gold coins, adding the promised bonus for the whipping demonstration. Elias checked each one by habit, though his mind was elsewhere, calculating distances, counting guards, planning escape routes. "Satisfied?" Weber asked, returning from giving additional orders regarding Sarah. "It'll do," Elias replied, pocketing the gold. "Now about the location of the woman's body. Actually, I find I'm no longer interested in recovering Miss Collins's remains." Weber smiled thinly. "Dead is dead after all, and I have what I truly wanted." He patted the black book, now resting on his desk. Elias shrugged, maintaining Reed's indifference. "Suits me, saves time." He gathered his saddlebags, preparing to leave, while desperately trying to formulate a plan to free Sarah and the others. He needed time, information, an opportunity that might not present itself if he left now. "Before you go," Weber said, moving to a sideboard where a decanter of amber liquid gleamed in the morning light, "perhaps you'd join me in a drink, a small celebration of our successful transaction." "I don't drink with clients," Elias replied, then deliberately reconsidered. "Though for an extra 50, I might make an exception." Weber laughed, genuinely amused. "Your reputation for avarice is well earned, Mr. Reed. Very well, 50 more for the pleasure of your company." He poured 2 glasses, offering one to Elias. 2 profitable partnerships. Elias took the glass but didn't drink immediately, watching as Weber sipped his own. Only when certain the liquor wasn't tampered with did he take a small taste. Good whiskey, expensive, the kind normally found in gentlemen's clubs back east rather than frontier outposts. "I admit," Weber said, settling into a chair with his drink, "I'm curious about your future plans. A man of your talents might find regular employment with our organization more lucrative than bounty hunting. I work alone, Elias replied automatically. Of course, but even independent contractors need steady clients. Weber's tone was casual, but his eyes were calculating. Senator Hollister and I are expanding operations throughout the territories. There's a need for men who can solve delicate problems discreetly. What kind of problems? Similar to the Collins woman. People who acquire information they shouldn't have. People who interfere with progress. Weber sipped his whiskey. The railroad is the future of this country, Mr. Reed. Those who stand in its way must be removed one way or another. It was an unexpected opportunity, a chance to learn more about the organization, perhaps even evidence that could help Cooper build his case. Elias affected thoughtful considerations, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Sounds more stable than bounties, he acknowledged. But I'd need specifics. Names, locations, payment terms. Weber's smile widened. Practical as ever. I appreciate that quality. He set his glass down, reaching for a drawer in his desk. I have something that might interest you. A list of priorities. People whose continued existence complicates our progress. The drawer opened, revealing not papers, but a revolver which Weber raised with practiced ease to point directly at Elias's chest. Unfortunately, he continued conversationally, your name has recently been added to that list, Mr. Blackwood. The trap closed with the audible click of the hammer being cocked. Elias froze, mind racing through options, each more desperate than the last. His own weapons were still, with the guards outside, the knife in his boot, too slow to reach before Weber could fire. You knew, he said, buying seconds to think. Not at first, Weber admitted. Your disguise is quite effective. But then I've made a study of fathers and daughters, you see. The way they look at each other, even when trying not to. Even when one is supposedly a stranger administering punishment. His smile turned cruel. Sarah recognized you during the whipping. It was subtle but unmistakable to someone watching for exactly that reaction. Elias set his glass down, slowly calculating the distance to Weber, the probability of reaching him before the gun fired. I wouldn't, Weber warned, reading his intentions. Unlike most men, I actually know how to use this effectively at close range. What now? Elias asked, still searching for options for time. Now we have a conversation about your Confederates. Weber kept the gun steady. The Apache camp where Lydia Collins is hiding. The federal marshal you met with in town. All the tiresome details of your little conspiracy. And if I don't feel like talking, then I bring Sarah back and continue her punishment while you watch. Weber's voice remained pleasant, reasonable. I'm told even the strongest men break when forced to witness the suffering of their children. Shall we test that theory? Rage and fear warred within Elias, but neither could override the tactical reality he was outmaneuvered, captured with no immediate path to escape that wouldn't endanger Sarah further. He needed time, a change in circumstances, an opportunity that didn't yet exist. You're going to kill me anyway, he said, stalling. Why should I tell you anything? Because how you die is still negotiable, Weber replied simply. Quick and relatively painless, or slow and agonizing. The same applies to Sarah, of course. He adjusted his grip on the revolver. I'll ask once more, then I'll have the guards bring her in. Where is Lydia Collins? The moment stretched taut with possibility and dread. Then from outside came the sudden staccato of gunfire, followed by shouts and the unmistakable war cry of Apache warriors. Victorio's men had arrived early, perhaps seeing Elias's danger through field glasses, perhaps simply unwilling to wait for a signal that might never come. Weber's head turned instinctively toward the sound, his concentration broken for a crucial second. Elias seized the moment, launching himself across the space between them with the coiled power of desperation. The gun fired, the bullet grazing his arm as he slammed into Weber, bearing the larger man to the ground with the momentum of his attack. They grappled for control of the weapon, Elias's wilderness-hardened strength against Weber's younger, heavier build. The revolver discharged again, the bullet splintering wood somewhere above them. Elias got a hand on Weber's wrist, slamming it against the floor until the gun clattered free, skidding under a nearby cabinet. Weber fought with the frenzied energy of a man who knew the price of defeat, landing a solid blow to Elias's ribs that sent pain lancing through his side. But Elias had been fighting for survival since before Weber was born, had learned combat in the brutal school of the Civil War and the Apache campaigns. He weathered the blows, working steadily to position himself for the kill. The knife from his boot came free in one smooth motion, its blade seeking Weber's throat, with the inevitability of justice long delayed. Weber saw it coming, eyes widening in sudden fear, hands rising to intercept. Too late, the steel bit deep, opening the soft flesh beneath his jaw in a spray of arterial blood. Weber made a sound, not quite a scream, more a sigh of disbelief, as his life pulsed out in rhythmic spurts. Elias held him down, watching the light fade from those pale blue eyes, feeling nothing but a cold certainty that this death, unlike so many he had caused, was fully earned. When it was done, he retrieved the revolver from under the cabinet, checking that it still had 4 rounds remaining. Outside, the gunfight continued, the sharp crack of rifles, punctuated by screams, and the thunder of running feet. The attack had caught the camp off guard, but the guards were numerous and well armed. Victorio's warriors would need help to prevail. Elias moved to the window, assessing the situation. The Apache had breached the main gate, engaging the guards in the central yard. Women were fleeing from the barracks, some running for the gate, others simply seeking shelter from the bullets flying in all directions. He searched for Sarah among them, but couldn't spot her in the chaos. The isolation cell, Weber had said. But where would that be? A quick search of the office revealed a crude map of the camp pinned to the inside of a cabinet door. The isolation cells were marked in a small building behind the main barracks, a short sprint across open ground from Weber's office, but directly through the worst of the fighting. Steeling himself, Elias checked the corridor outside the office. Empty, all available men had responded to the attack at the gate. He moved swiftly, staying close to the walls, using skills honed during decades of scouting to remain as invisible as possible amid the chaos. The isolation building was little more than a glorified shed, its interior divided into 3 small cells with barred doors. 2 were empty. In the third, Sarah sat huddled against the wall, her torn dress pulled back into place, her eyes wide with fear at the sounds of battle. "Sarah," Elias called softly, working the simple lock with fingers that refused to tremble despite the urgency pounding through his veins. She looked up, recognition dawning through the fear. "Father, it really is you. It's me." The lock gave way, the door swinging open. "Can you walk?" She nodded, rising unsteadily but with determination. "I knew it was you when you—" Her voice faltered. "I'm sorry." He said the words inadequate for the guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. "I had no choice." "I know." Her hand touched his arm briefly. "You pulled your strikes. I could tell." There was no time for further explanation or apology. The gunfire outside was intensifying, suggesting the guards were rallying, perhaps driving the Apache back toward the gate. "We need to move," Elias said, checking the revolver again. "Stay behind me, do exactly as I say. If I fall, run for the gate. Victorio's men will help you." Victorio, Sarah's eyes widened further. The Apache war chief. Long story. Elias peered outside, plotting their path through the battlefield. "Ready." She straightened, something of her old spirit returning to her eyes. "Ready." Together they emerged into the morning light, into a world of smoke and blood and chaos, where the past and future collided with the force of a thunderstorm. Somewhere in that chaos was the path to freedom, if they could find it before the bullets found them. The world collapsed to a series of vivid fragments. Gunfire splintering wood near Elias's head, Sarah's ragged breathing as they sprinted between buildings, the copper taste of blood and fear. They moved in desperate bursts, father and daughter bound by blood and survival, navigating the chaos of a battle neither had anticipated. The Apache warriors had penetrated deep into the compound, their disciplined assault creating corridors of relative safety amid the mayhem. Elias guided Sarah toward one such corridor, his experienced eye reading the battle's flow like a tracker reads sign. They reached the shadow of the main barracks just as a group of guards rallied near Weber's office, returning fire at attackers they couldn't clearly see. "The other women," Sarah gasped, pulling at his sleeve. "We can't leave them." Elias hesitated. Their clearest path to safety lay straight ahead through the breached gate where Victorio's men had established a defensive position. Detouring to the barracks would mean additional risk, more time under fire. But Sarah's eyes, so like her mother's, held the same unflinching moral clarity that had first drawn him to Margaret decades ago. In that moment, he saw not just his daughter, but the woman she had become, forged in suffering, yet unbroken in spirit. "Show me," he said, adjusting their course. They skirted the edge of the yard, using smoke from a burning guardhouse for cover. Sarah led him to the nearest barracks, a long, low building with barred windows and a heavy padlocked door. Inside, faces pressed against the bars, women watching the battle with the desperate hope of the long imprisoned. The padlock yielded to a well-placed shot from Weber's revolver. As the door swung open, women surged forward, 20 or more, their faces bearing the hollow-eyed look of sustained trauma. Some hesitated at the threshold, as if freedom itself had become a concept too dangerous to trust. "This way," Elias directed, pointing toward the gate. "Stay low, move fast. The Apache will cover you." A woman near the back of the group stepped forward, her bearing suggesting authority despite her ragged appearance. "Ruth Collins," she introduced herself, eyes studying Elias with wary intelligence. "You're with Lydia, aren't you?" Elias's surprise must have shown on his face, for Ruth nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "I heard the guards talking. They said Lydia escaped, that she was gathering evidence. Her voice lowered. Is she alive? Yes, Elias confirmed. She's with Victorio's people. Safe. Relief transformed Ruth's face. Years of hardship momentarily lifted. There are 2 more barracks, she said, pragmatic despite her emotion, and a sick house for the women who can't work anymore. More gunfire erupted near the gate, the battle's intensity increasing as reinforcements arrived from somewhere beyond the compound. They had minutes at most before the advantage shifted decisively toward the guards. Sarah, take Ruth and these women to the gate, Elias instructed. I'll free the others. No, Sarah's voice was firm. We stay together. He recognized the set of her jaw, another inheritance from Margaret, that immovable stubbornness when principle was at stake. There was no time to argue, and part of him recognized the tactical advantage of having help. Ruth, lead half these women to the gate, he amended. Tell Victorio's men we're freeing the others. Sarah and I will bring the rest. Ruth nodded immediately, organizing the women into groups, her natural leadership evident even after years of captivity. As she led her group toward the gate, Elias and Sarah moved toward the second barracks, dodging between patches of cover, the revolver ready in Elias's hand. The next building was secured with the same type of padlock, dispatched with another precious bullet. Inside were fewer women, these in worse condition, thin to the point of emaciation, bruised, some bearing the marks of recent whippings. Most could walk, supporting those who couldn't. Sarah spoke to them in gentle tones, organizing their movement, while Elias stood guard. 1 more barracks, then the sick house, she murmured as they regrouped in the shadow of the building. The 3rd barracks was empty, its occupants perhaps already moved to the train Weber had planned or taken by guards when the attack began. The sick house, however, revealed the operation's darkest aspect. The small building at the compound's edge contained a dozen women in advanced stages of illness or injury, lying on crude pallets, largely untended. My God, Elias breathed, confronted with suffering he hadn't witnessed since the worst field hospitals of the Civil War. They don't waste medicine on those who can't work, Sarah explained, her voice flat with suppressed rage. They just wait for them to die, then bury them behind the fence. No markers, nothing to show they ever existed. Despite their condition, most of the women were alert enough to understand that rescue had arrived. With Sarah and 2 stronger escapees helping, they managed to evacuate all but 2 who had already passed beyond human aid. Elias said a brief prayer over them, the only farewell these anonymous victims would receive. Their expanded group moved slowly toward the gate, the battle's tide now visibly turning against the Apache warriors. Guards had organized a counterattack, pushing Victorio's men steadily back to superior numbers and firepower, gradually overwhelming tactical skill and righteous fury. At the gate itself, Ruth had successfully delivered her group to the Apache lines. Victorio himself was visible, directing his warriors with calm precision, despite the increasingly desperate situation. When he spotted Elias and the second group of women, he dispatched 3 men to provide covering fire, creating a narrow corridor through the conflict. Hurry, he called, his voice carrying over the gunfire. We cannot hold much longer. Elias urged the women forward, supporting a frail girl who could barely stand. Sarah took up the rear, helping another woman whose leg had been broken and improperly set. They were halfway to the gate when a new volley of gunfire erupted from the guardhouse roof, a sniper team establishing a commanding position over the yard. The first shot struck one of Victorio's warriors, dropping him mid-stride. The second kicked up dirt at Elias's feet. The third found flesh. The woman Sarah was helping cried out and collapsed, blood blossoming on her shoulder. Keep moving, Elias shouted to the others, turning back to help Sarah with the wounded woman. Together, they half-carried, half-dragged her toward the gate, bullets stitching the ground around them in a deadly pattern. They were 20 yards from safety when Deputy Harlan appeared at the guardhouse door, rifle raised. His first shot went wide. His second would not, Elias knew, with grim certainty. There was no cover, no time to return a fire with the revolver. In that suspended moment, Elias made the only choice a father could. He stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her with his body, as Harlan's finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle cracked. Pain blossomed in Elias's chest, a familiar burning sensation he remembered from Shiloh, from Gettysburg, from a dozen smaller engagements history had already forgotten. He staggered but remained standing, determined to keep Sarah protected until they reached the gate. Another shot, but not from Harlan's rifle. The deputy jerked backward, surprise replacing the triumph on his face as he collapsed. Behind him stood the young woman who had served Covey in Weber's office, Weber's own revolver now smoking in her hand. Go, she called to Elias, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll cover you. He had no breath to thank her, all his energy focused on remaining conscious, on moving forward, those final crucial yards. Sarah's arm around his waist provided support. He desperately needed her strength, somehow sustaining them both. Then they were through the gate, strong hands pulling them to safety behind a makeshift barricade of overturned wagons. Victorio's warriors laid down suppressive fire as they retreated in disciplined stages, covering the last of the women as they fled the compound. My father's hit, Sarah was saying, her voice seeming to come from very far away. He needs help. Elias tried to tell her he was fine, that they needed to keep moving, but his voice wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted strangely, colors bleeding into one another, sounds muffling, as if heard underwater. He was vaguely aware of being lifted onto a horse, of someone mounting behind him to keep him from falling. Then darkness claimed him, and he knew nothing more. He dreamed of Margaret. She stood in the doorway of their first home, sunlight turning her hair to spun gold, her hands resting protectively over the swell of her belly where Sarah grew. "You haven't finished yet," she told him, her voice gentle but firm. "They still need you." He tried to explain that he was tired, that the burden of years and violence had grown too heavy, but she only smiled, that knowing smile that had always seen through his pretenses. "Since when does Elias Blackwood abandon a mission half complete?" she asked, and then she was gone, the doorway empty, leaving only the echo of her voice and the lingering scent of the lavender water she had loved. Consciousness returned in painful increments. First came awareness of his body, the tight binding around his chest, the bone-deep ache with each breath, the persistent throbbing of a wound that had come close to ending him. Then a sound, low voices speaking Apache, the crackle of a fire, the soft crying of a woman somewhere nearby. Finally, when he managed to force his eyes open, sight the interior of a lodge larger than the one he had stayed in before, illuminated by the soft glow of a central fire. "He wakes," said a voice he recognized as Victorio's mother, the old healer. Sarah's face appeared above him, drawn with exhaustion, but alight with relief. "Father," she breathed, taking his hand in both of hers. "We thought we'd lost you." He tried to speak, found his throat too dry, accepted the water she held to his lips with shaking gratitude. "The others," he managed finally. "Safe," Sarah assured him. "All the women from the camp and most of Victorio's warriors. We're in their winter stronghold deep in the mountains. Weber's men won't find us here." "Weber called him dead," she confirmed. "You killed him before the attack." Memory returned in fragments, the fight in Weber's office, the knife, the arterial spray of blood. No regret accompanied the recollection, only a grim satisfaction that one architect of so much suffering had faced justice. "How long?" he asked, noting the growth of his beard, the healing progress of the bullet wound visible beneath the bandages. 9 days, Sarah answered. "The fever only broke yesterday. The old woman said the bullet came within a finger's width of your heart." 9 days. Much could happen in 9 days. "Cooper," Sarah's expression clouded. "No word. We've been isolated here waiting for you to recover enough to travel. Victorio sent scouts to Redemption 3 days ago, but they haven't returned." The implications were troubling. Had Cooper secured his warrant? Had Weber's death altered the organization's plans? Was Senator Hollister still coming for the groundbreaking ceremony? "Help me up," Elias requested, attempting to rise despite the pain that flared with even slight movement. "You shouldn't," Sarah began, but he cut her off with a look she knew well from childhood, the one that brooked no argument when safety was at stake. With Sarah's reluctant assistance, he managed to sit upright, the world swimming momentarily before stabilizing. He was in Victorio's own lodge, he realized, an honor that spoke to his changed status among the Apache. "Where is Victorio, Lydia?" he asked, noting their absence. "Council meeting. Discussing next steps." Sarah helped him drink more water. "Lydia's been splitting time between caring for you and the women from the camp. Ruth especially." The reunion of the Collins sisters had likely been emotional, a bright spot amid the darkness of their recent experiences. Elias found himself wanting to witness Lydia's joy, to see her face free from the worry and determination that had marked it since their first encounter. "I need to join the council," he said, making another attempt to rise. Sarah placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Father, you can barely sit up. The bullet tore through your lung. You need rest." "What I need," he replied with quiet intensity, "is to finish what we started. Weber was just one man. Hollister is still out there, still planning to visit Redemption." He met her eyes directly. "And you know what happens to witnesses when powerful men are threatened?" Sarah's expression hardened, the trauma of her captivity evident in the shadows behind her eyes. "They disappear," she acknowledged. "Like we were supposed to disappear on that train." "Exactly. So unless we want to spend our lives running, hiding in mountains and deserts, we need to end this now. While we have the evidence, the witnesses, and the element of surprise." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, her practical nature recognizing the truth in his words. "I'll help you to the council, but if you collapse, I'm bringing you straight back here." "Fair enough," he agreed, suppressing a grimace as she helped him to his feet. The mountain stronghold was more substantial than the temporary camp they had visited earlier, a hidden valley accessible only through a narrow pass, easily defended against intruders. 24 lodges formed a rough circle around a central council fire, with smaller fires for cooking and warmth scattered throughout the encampment. Women moved between lodges carrying water and firewood, some from the tribe, others recognizable as rescues from Camp 7. At the council fire sat Victorio and his senior warriors, along with Lydia and Ruth Collins. They looked up as Elias approached, leaning heavily on Sarah's arm. Surprise registered on their faces, followed by varying degrees of approval or concern. The scout returns from death's shadow. Victorio observed, gesturing to an empty place beside him. Your spirit is strong, Blackwood. Stubborn is the word my wife used, Elias replied, lowering himself carefully to the offered seat. The brief walk had drained what little strength he possessed, but he forced himself to sit straight to meet the eyes of those around the fire with steady resolve. Lydia studied him with a doctor's assessing gaze. You shouldn't be up yet, she said, echoing Sarah's earlier concern. Probably not, he agreed, but time is running short. What news from Redemption? The glances exchanged around the fire confirmed his fears before anyone spoke. Finally, Victorio broke the silence. Weber's death has not gone unnoticed, he said gravely. Troops have been deployed from Fort Huachuca supposedly to protect the railroad's groundbreaking ceremony, but in truth to hunt us. The town is under martial law with checkpoints on all roads. Senator Hollister arrived 2 days ago heavily guarded. Cooper, Elias asked, though he already suspected the answer. Arrested, Ruth supplied, her voice tight with anger. Charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. They're claiming he helped us attack the camp, that the women there were legitimate employees, not prisoners. Without Weber's records or surviving witnesses, it would be difficult to prove otherwise, Lydia added. The Black Book alone isn't enough, especially since it could be dismissed as a forgery. The situation was worse than Elias had feared. With military involvement, their options narrowed considerably. Victorio's people could not risk direct confrontation with army units. Such an action would justify the extinction campaign many territorial officials had long advocated. When is the groundbreaking ceremony? Elias asked. 3 days from now, Victorio answered. Hollister, the governor, railroad executives, and army officers will all attend. The event is being promoted as a celebration of progress in civilization's advance. Civilization. The word carried bitter irony given what they had witnessed at Camp 7, the dark underbelly of that progress, built on the exploitation and disposal of human lives deemed expendable. We need to expose them, Elias said, the fragments of a plan taking shape in his mind. Not just Weber's operation, but Hollister's involvement. We need to do it publicly with witnesses who can't be silenced. How? Lydia asked. We can't approach the ceremony. Any of us would be recognized and arrested or shot on sight. Not all of us? Elias replied, turning to Sarah and Ruth. They believe you are both still at Camp 7, scheduled for transport on a train that never departed. They don't know you've been freed. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. You want us to go to the ceremony? Not alone, he clarified, but as part of a strategy. If we could get you and other survivors into position as witnesses with the Black Book as evidence, and Cooper's testimony if he can be freed, it would be your war against the U.S. senators, Ruth pointed out, in a town controlled by his allies with military support. Not if we had additional proof, Elias countered. Weber kept records, detailed ones. We saw just the Black Book, but there must be more. Correspondence with Hollister, financial transactions, documentation of the entire operation. Such records would be in Weber's office at the camp, Victorio said, which is now heavily guarded by the troops from Fort Huachuca. Or in his home in Redemption, Lydia suggested. A man like Weber, controlling so many illegal activities, would keep insurance evidence that could implicate his superiors if he ever needed leverage. The idea had merit. Weber had been calculating, cautious in his cruelty. He would have protected himself against betrayal from above, would have maintained documentation that could destroy Hollister if necessary. We need to search his house, Elias decided, before the ceremony. If we find conclusive evidence linking Hollister to the trafficking operation, we could expose him publicly with enough witnesses and documentation that even his influence couldn't suppress the truth. Getting into Redemption won't be easy, Victoria warned. My scouts report checkpoints on all roads patrols in the surrounding countryside. Which is why they won't expect us to try, Elias replied. They're looking for a large group of Apache warriors, armed women seeking revenge. Not 1 or 2 people slipping in quietly. You can barely walk, Sarah protested. You're in no condition for this. I won't be going. Elias acknowledged the admission difficult but necessary. My face is too well known and my wound would slow the mission. He turned to Lydia. You know Redemption. You treated patients there for years. If anyone can move through the town unrecognized, it's you. Lydia considered this. With the right disguise, perhaps, But I'd need help someone who knows Weber's house, its layout and security. I do, said a quiet voice from the edge of the council circle. The young woman who had shot Harlan, who had served coffee in Weber's office, stepped forward hesitantly. I worked in his house for 2 years. I know where he kept his private papers. Elias remembered her from the camp the moment she had saved them at the gate. In the chaos of escape and his subsequent injury, he hadn't realized she had come with them. What's your name? He asked. Anna, she replied. Anna Kovac. I was Mr. Weber's housemaid before he sent me to the camp for disobedience. The euphemism hung in the air, its real meaning clear to all present. Weber's abuse had extended to his household staff, another demonstration of his belief that certain lives existed solely for his use and disposal. Would you be willing to guide Litsi? Elias asked. It would mean returning to redemption, risking recapture. Anna's chin lifted, a fierce determination replacing her earlier hesitancy. For the chance to destroy the man who destroyed so many lives, yes. Even though he's dead, his work continues. The senator was worse than Weber, colder, more calculating. He visited the house, sometimes selected girls personally. Her testimony added another layer to the case against Hollister, but would be dismissed as the word of a servant against a powerful man unless supported by documentary evidence. So we have a plan, Elias summarized. Lydia and Anna infiltrate Redemption, search Weber's house for evidence linking Hollister to the trafficking operation. If they find it, we use it to expose him at the groundbreaking ceremony. And if they're caught, Sarah asked the question hanging heavy with implication. Then we proceed with what we have, Ruth answered before Elias could. The Black Book, our testimony, Cooper's investigation if he can be freed. We take our case directly to the governor during the ceremony, create a public spectacle that can't be quietly disposed of. It was a desperate strategy balanced on the knife edge of too many variables, too many potential points of failure. But desperation had been their companion since the beginning, and still they had managed to free dozens of women to kill Weber to escape with their lives, if not their safety. When would we leave? Lydia asked, practical as always. Tonight, Elias replied, under cover of darkness. Victorio's scouts can guide you to within a mile of town, then you proceed alone as travelers caught after curfew seeking shelter. I'll need supplies, she said, already calculating requirements. Disguises for Anna and myself, something to explain our presence if questioned. We have what you need, Victorio assured her, clothes taken from white settlers during raids, papers that can be altered. The discussion continued into practical details, timing meeting points, recognition signals. Elias contributed where needed, but found his strength waning as the council progressed. The wound in his chest throbbed with increasing intensity, his breathing growing labored, despite his efforts to conceal his discomfort. Sarah noticed first, her hand finding his shoulder. You need to rest, she murmured, loud enough only for him to hear. You've done what you came to do. He wanted to protest, to remain until every detail was settled, but the darkness was encroaching at the edges of his vision again. With a reluctant nod, he allowed Sarah to help him rise to guide him back toward Victorio's lodge. We leave at nightfall, Lydia confirmed as they departed. I'll come see you before we go. Back in the lodge, the exhaustion he'd been fighting crashed over him in an overwhelming wave. As Sarah helped him lie down, he caught her hand, suddenly urgent. If something happens, he began, his voice rough with pain and emotion. If I don't, she interrupted fiercely. You're not dying, not after everything we've survived. Listen, he insisted. If I don't make it, don't seek revenge. Finish this expose, Hollister, then live. Build something good from all this darkness. His grip tightened on her hand. Promise me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. I promise, she said softly, but you have to promise something too. Promise you'll fight to stay alive to see this through with me. It was the request of a daughter who had already lost one parent, who had endured months believing herself abandoned by the other. Elias couldn't refuse. I promise, he replied, the words a covenant between them. Sarah nodded satisfied, then settled beside him as she had as a child, when nightmares drove her to seek the safety of her father's presence. Together they drifted into an uneasy sleep, both haunted by memories of what had been endured and fears of what might yet come. Lydia came as promised, before departing, to her appearance already altered for the dangerous mission ahead. Her hair was now honey blonde rather than dark, her clothes those of a respectable widow traveling west to join family. Anna stood beside her, similarly transformed younger, and therefore presented as Lydia's daughter. We'll return in 2 days, Lydia told Elias, who had woken at their entrance. The night before the ceremony. If we're not back by then, we'll proceed with the alternative plan, he finished for her, unwilling to dwell on the possibilities her unfinished sentence suggested. She nodded, then surprised him by leaning down to press a gentle kiss to his forehead. Rest, heal. We'll need you for what comes next. After they had gone escorted by Victorio's scouts toward the distant lights of redemption, Elias lay awake in the quiet lodge, his mind turning over contingencies, risks, alternatives. The plan was dangerous, perhaps foolhardy, but necessity had narrowed their options to those that carried the highest stakes. Sarah returned from seeing them off, her expression troubled. "Do you think they'll succeed?" she asked, settling beside the fire. "Lydia Collins has survived worse odds," Elias replied, finding comfort in the truth of the statement, "and she has powerful motivation." "Ruth," Sarah acknowledged, "they're very alike, you know, same determination, same sense of justice. Ruth organized resistance in the camp, helped women who would have given up." She paused, memories darkening her features. "She's the reason I survived long enough for you to find me." The admission carried layers of meaning, hinting at depths of suffering Sarah had yet to fully share. Elias ached to ask to understand what she had endured, but knew that some wounds needed time before they could bear examination. "Try to sleep," he suggested instead. "Tomorrow we prepare for either outcome." But sleep proved elusive for both father and daughter, their thoughts, with the two women making their way toward a town transformed into an armed camp carrying the fragile hope of justice on their shoulders. In the darkness of the lodge, with Sarah's breathing finally steadied into slumber, beside him, Elias faced his deepest fear. Not death, which had been his companion for decades, but failure. Failure to protect his daughter, to honor his promise to Lydia, to bring down the corrupt power that had destroyed so many lives. He had lived by violence for much of his life, had taken lives in war, and peace had tracked and hunted his fellow humans across the frontiers of a changing nation. Now wounded and weakened, he faced the possibility that violence alone would not be enough, that justice in this new world required different weapons, different strategies than those he had mastered. As dawn approached, painting the lodge walls with pale light, Elias Blackwood made a silent vow. If they survived the coming confrontation, if they somehow managed to expose Hollister and dismantle his operation, he would lay down his guns for good. He would find a way to build rather than destroy, to protect without killing, to serve the future rather than avenge the past. It was a promise made in the soul's dark night, when hope seemed distant and pain pressed close. Whether he would have the chance to keep it remained to be seen. Dawn broke over redemption on the day of the groundbreaking ceremony, painting the sky in bands of crimson and gold that seemed to Elias like an omen or a warning. From their vantage point on a ridge overlooking the town, he could see the preparations already underway, a platform erected near the proposed depot site, bunting in patriotic colors adorning the Main Street buildings, soldiers from Fort Huachuca establishing a perimeter around the event space. "No sign of them," Sarah murmured, lowering the field glasses she'd been using to scan the streets below. "They should have been back by now." Elias took the glasses, ignoring the protest from his healing wound as he raised his arm. His strength had returned somewhat over the past 2 days, enough to ride the gentle mare Victorio had provided, enough to sit upright without assistance. But he was still far from whole, his breathing labored with any exertion, his right arm weakened by the bullet's path through muscle and lung. "There's still time," he replied, more to reassure himself than his daughter. "The ceremony isn't until noon." But the sun had already cleared the eastern mountains, and Lydia and Anna had promised to return the previous night. Their absence spoke volumes, none of it encouraging. Victorio approached his moccasins, silent on the rocky soil. "My scouts report increased activity at the checkpoints," he said without preamble. "They're searching every wagon, every traveler, looking for someone." "Looking for them," Sarah corrected grimly. "They've been discovered." The possibility had been present from the beginning, but hearing it stated aloud sent a chill through Elias's already aching body. If Lydia and Anna had been captured, if they were being held somewhere in redemption, "We proceed with the alternative plan," he decided, lowering the field glasses. "As we discussed." Victorio nodded, unsurprised. "My warriors are ready. 20 men positioned in the hills, overlooking the ceremony. Not to attack, but to provide cover if needed." It was the most the Apache leader could offer without risking his people's annihilation. The army detachment in redemption would respond with overwhelming force to any perceived threat, using it as justification for the campaign many officers had long desired against Victorio's band. "Ruth has prepared the other women," Sarah added. "Those willing to testify are ready. We have the black book and the statements Cooper collected during his investigation." It wasn't enough, not against someone with Hollister's power and connections. Without documentary evidence directly linking the senator to Weber's operation, it would be the word of hysterical women and a disgraced marshal against a respected political figure. The court of public opinion might be briefly scandalized, but the legal system would ultimately side with power and privilege. "If we're going to do this, we need leverage." Elias set his mind working through alternatives, something Hollister fears more than exposure. "What does a man like that fear?" Sarah asked. "He has money, power, political protection." His future, Elias realized, pieces falling into place. Cooper said he's being considered for a cabinet position in the next administration. That's his vulnerability, his ambition. Victorio's eyes narrowed with interest. How do we use this? By threatening not just his reputation but his freedom. Elias turned to face them, fully energy returning as the strategy crystallized. Hollister's counting on controlling the narrative, on dismissing any accusations as desperate lies from criminals and savages. But what if we had evidence he couldn't dismiss, evidence that would lead to federal charges, not just scandal? The financial records, Sarah suggested, following his thinking. If Weber was moving money to Hollister, there would be a paper trail. Exactly, and not just in Weber's possession. Elias gestured toward the town below. Redemption has a bank. Weber would have used it for legitimate transactions, possibly even some of the illegitimate ones disguised as business expenses. Bank records are private, Victorio pointed out. How would we access them? Elias smiled grimly. By creating a sufficient distraction and having the right person do the accessing. He turned to Sarah. You worked at a bank in San Francisco before Weber lured you away. You know how financial records are organized. Her eyes widened with understanding. You want me to break into the bank during the ceremony? Not break in, walk in as Sarah Blackwood, daughter of a local rancher, returning after a long absence. The bank manager knows you would have no reason to suspect anything amiss. Elias had been formulating this contingency since first learning of Lydia and Anna's mission. With everyone's attention on the ceremony, you could examine Weber's accounts, find the connections to Hollister. It was dangerous, perhaps even more so than Lydia and Anna's infiltration, but it offered a chance, slim but real, of finding the evidence they desperately needed. I'll do it, Sarah said without hesitation. But I'll need a distraction, something to keep any remaining bank employees occupied while I search the records. That'll be my responsibility, Ruth said, approaching from the camp, where the women from Camp 7 had been preparing. Several of us will create a scene near the ceremony platform, not enough to be arrested immediately, but enough to draw attention. The rest will position themselves throughout the crowd, ready to testify publicly when the moment comes. Elias studied the Collins sister, noting the same steady resolve he'd come to respect in Lydia. The family resemblance was striking, not just in their features, but in their unshakable determination when justice was at stake. And if Lydia and Anna return with evidence from Weber's house, he asked. Then we have multiple options, Ruth replied pragmatically. More chances for success. The plan was taking shape, desperate but not hopeless. Victorio would position his warriors to provide cover if an escape became necessary. Ruth and the women from Camp 7 would create the initial distraction and stand ready to testify. Sarah would attempt to access Weber's bank records, searching for the financial connections to Hollister. And Elias, I'll find Cooper, he decided. If he's being held in the town jail, there might be a way to free him. His testimony as a federal marshal would add credibility to our accusations. You're still wounded, Sarah protested. The jail will be guarded. Not as heavily as usual, with most deputies assigned to ceremony security. Elias had observed the town's preparations through the field glasses, noted the deployment patterns. And I won't be recognized in this. He gestured to the clothing. Victorio had provided a Catholic priest's black cassock and collar, complemented by a wide-brimmed hat and the wild gray beard Elias had grown during his convalescence. The disguise was simple but effective, transforming him from frontier scout to aging man of God with minimal effort. A priest? Sarah looked skeptical. Father Thomas from the mission near Tucson, come to offer a blessing for the new railroad. Elias had practiced the role, adjusting his speech patterns and posture to match. No one questions a priest visiting prisoners to offer spiritual comfort. The disguise had been Lydia's suggestion before she left, recognizing that Elias would never remain behind if the primary plan failed. She had helped him memorize enough Latin phrases and biblical references to maintain the deception through brief encounters. As the others dispersed to make final preparations, Elias remained on the ridge, watching the town come alive with activity. Somewhere within those streets, Lydia and Anna might be held prisoner, or might still be free, hidden, waiting for an opportunity to complete their mission. The not knowing was its own kind of torment. Sarah returned with the mare already saddled for the journey into town. It's time, she said softly. Are you sure about this? Elias rose carefully, accepting her help to mount the horse. The pain in his chest flared, then subsided to its usual persistent ache. No, he admitted, but I'm sure about what happens if we do nothing. She nodded, understanding all he left unspoken. If they failed today, Hollister's operation would continue under new management. The women who had escaped would be hunted, recaptured, or killed. The truth would be buried alongside Weber, and justice would remain as distant as the stars. Then let's finish this, Sarah said, mounting her own horse. One way or another. Together they descended toward redemption, father and daughter, riding toward a reckoning years in the making. Behind them, the Apache camp was already being dismantled, the women and children preparing to move deeper into the mountains if the day's gambit failed. Victorio's warriors were positioning themselves in the surrounding hills, invisible to casual observation, but ready to act if needed. It was, Elias reflected, perhaps the strangest alliance the frontier had ever witnessed. Apache warriors, traumatized women, a wounded scout, and an unlikely collection of allies, all united against corruption that spanned from a territorial outpost to the halls of Washington. The odds were long, the risks immense, but sometimes justice required nothing less than everything. As they approached the first checkpoint, Elias straightened in the saddle, summoning the dignity and calm authority of the priest he was pretending to be. Sarah rode slightly behind the dutiful escort to an elderly clergyman traveling to offer God's blessing on mankind's progress. The soldiers at the checkpoint were young, respectful of the cloth, if not necessarily the faith it represented. They asked perfunctory questions, satisfied with Elias's gentle responses, and the letter of introduction he presented, forged by Victorio's people, but convincing enough to pass casual inspection. The ceremony's at noon, Father, one soldier offered helpfully. Platforms at the end of Main Street, can't miss it. God's blessings upon you, my son. Elias replied, the words feeling strange in his mouth, but apparently natural enough to the soldiers who waved them through with minimal scrutiny. The town itself was transformed from when Elias had last seen it. Flags and bunting decorated storefronts, banners proclaimed a new era for redemption and progress through unity. The streets were crowded with townsfolk and their Sunday-best visitors from surrounding settlements, and a significant military presence, at least a company of soldiers from Fort Huachuca, their blue uniforms stark against the predominantly civilian crowd. At the intersection where their paths would diverge, Sarah toward the bank, Elias toward the jail, they paused for a final exchange. Be careful, Sarah murmured, eyes conveying all the emotion her restrained words did not. Meet at the livery stable at 2 o'clock as planned. If either of us doesn't arrive by 2:30, the other leaves immediately. Elias reminded her it was the hardest part of their agreement, but necessary. Neither could risk capture for the sake of the other. The evidence they sought was too important. Sarah nodded reluctantly, then surprised him by leaning over to press a quick kiss to his cheek. For luck, she said, then turned her horse toward the bank, her posture transforming into that of a confident young woman returning home after an extended absence. Elias watched her go, pride momentarily overwhelming fear for her safety. Then he directed his mare toward the jailhouse, a small adobe building set back from the main street. As expected, it appeared minimally staffed, most deputies having been assigned to ceremony security. A single guard sat outside, rifle across his knees, expression bored beneath the brim of his hat. Good morning, my son, Elias called, as he approached, his voice gentle but carrying. I've come to offer spiritual comfort to those imprisoned here. The deputy straightened, surprised by the unexpected visitor. Ain't no one asked for a priest, he replied, suspicious, but constrained by respect for the clergy. The Lord's mercy doesn't wait for an invitation, Elias replied smoothly, especially for men like Marshal Cooper facing serious charges. His soul may require preparation. The mention of Cooper caused the deputy's expression to shift from suspicion to something like satisfaction. Cooper ain't here, he said. Transferred him to Tucson 2 days ago. Military escort. Senator's orders. The news was a blow to their already fragile plan. Cooper's testimony had been a key element, his status as a federal marshal lending legitimacy to their accusations. Without him, they lost both evidence and credibility. I see, Elias said, maintaining his priestly demeanor despite the setback. Are there other prisoners who might benefit from prayer, then? The deputy shrugged. Just a couple of drunks sleeping it off and 2 women brought in yesterday. Suspicious characters, according to the senator's men, found them snooping around Weber's house. Elias's heart contracted painfully. Women, you say, not local. One claimed to be a widow heading to California. Others said she was her daughter. The deputy spat tobacco juice into the dust. Nobody believed them, too interested in a dead man's property to be innocent travelers. Lydia and Anna, then, captured as they had feared, but alive and being held here rather than already transported elsewhere. Perhaps they too could benefit from spiritual guidance, Elias suggested, fighting to keep his voice steady. Women far from home in unfamiliar circumstances. The deputy considered this, clearly weighing his instructions against the cultural deference accorded to clergy. I suppose it couldn't hurt, he decided finally. But I'll need to check you for weapons first, Father. No offense. None taken, my son. Prudence is a virtue. Elias dismounted carefully, concealing the pain that shot through his chest at the movement. The deputy's search was cursory, respectful of the cassoc's supposed sanctity. He missed a small knife concealed in Elias's boot, identical to the one that had ended Weber's life. 10 minutes, the deputy said, unlocking the jailhouse door. That's all. They're being moved after the ceremony. Elias nodded gratefully, following the man into the dimly lit interior. The jailhouse was small, with just 4 cells, 2 empty, one containing the mentioned drunks, and the fourth holding Lydia and Anna. Both women looked up as Elias entered, their expressions carefully neutral, despite what must have been shock at his appearance. Ladies, the deputy announced, the father here wants to offer you some praying time, 10 minutes. No funny business. He retreated to a desk near the entrance, still within earshot, but attempting to provide some privacy for the supposed spiritual consultation. Elias approached the cell we had bowed, as if in preliminary prayer. My children, he said loudly enough for the deputy to hear, God has not abandoned you in your time of trial. Lydia's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she recognized his voice beneath the affected accent. Anna simply stared, confusion evident in her expression. We were not expecting spiritual comfort, Lydia replied carefully. But we are grateful, Father. Elias positioned himself with his back to the deputy, using his body to shield the conversation from observation. What happened? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. We found evidence, Lydia murmured, leaning forward as if eager for prayer. Letters between Weber and Hollister, financial records, even photographs. Everything needed to prove the connection. Hope surged within Elias. Where is it now? Hidden, Anna answered so softly he almost missed it. In the hollow post of Weber's bed. They searched the house but didn't find it. The ceremony, Lydia asked, eyes conveying the question she dared not voice aloud. Proceeding as planned, Elias confirmed. Sarah is at the bank looking for financial records. Ruth and the others are in position. He paused, weighing options rapidly. When are they moving you? After the ceremony, Lydia replied. To Tucson, like Cooper. Hollister wants all potential witnesses far from redemption before he leaves, which meant they had hours at most to free Lydia and Anna, retrieve the hidden evidence, and confront Hollister publicly before he departed. An impossible timeline under normal circumstances, but they had long since left normal behind. I'll create a distraction, Elias decided, when I do be ready to move. Lydia's expression tightened with concern. Your wound is healing, he interrupted. Focus on being ready when the opportunity comes. The deputy stirred at his desk, checking his pocket watch. Time's about up, Father. Elias nodded, raising his voice again. Let us pray together, my children, for guidance in dark times, for strength against adversity. He recited a Latin blessing. Lydia had taught him, his pronunciation atrocious, but convincing enough for the uneducated deputy. Amen, Lydia responded, meeting his eyes with a gaze that communicated complete understanding of what was to come. Elias left the jailhouse with measured steps, thanking the deputy for his Christian charity, promising to return later with proper Bible verses for the women's edification. Once out of sight, however, he moved with renewed purpose toward the center of town, where crowds were already gathering for the ceremony. The platform stood at the end of Main Street, festooned with flags and banners, a podium at its center, ready for the speeches that would mark the occasion. Soldiers formed a perimeter around it, keeping the growing crowd at a respectful distance. On the platform itself, a group of dignitaries had assembled, the mayor of Redemption Railroad, executives in expensive suits, military officers in dress uniforms, and at the center, unmistakable despite the years since Elias had last seen him, stood Senator William Hollister. Tall, imposing, with the silver hair and patrician features that had graced campaign posters across the Western Territories, Hollister radiated the confident authority of a man accustomed to deference. His tailored suit and gold watch chain spoke of wealth, his posture of power long held and rarely challenged. This was the man who had ordered Sarah's abduction, who had approved the system that imprisoned and exploited dozens of women, who had profited from suffering while maintaining a public persona of respectability and progress. Looking at him, Elias felt a cold rage so profound it momentarily eclipsed the pain of his wound. He scanned the crowd, looking for Ruth and the women from Camp 7. They were dispersed as planned, positioned strategically around the perimeter, each dressed as respectably as their limited resources allowed. Ruth herself stood near the front, her bearing dignified despite the haunted shadows in her eyes. Of Sarah there was no sign, which meant she had successfully reached the bank. Elias could only hope she was finding what they needed and that she would complete her task before the ceremony concluded. A band struck up the Star-Spangled Banner, the crowd removing hats and standing at respectful attention. Elias did the same, using the opportunity to continue assessing the situation. The distraction needed to free Lydia and Anna would have to be significant enough to draw the deputy away from the jail, but not so alarming as to trigger a complete lockdown of the town. As the anthem concluded and the mayor stepped forward to begin the proceedings, Elias noted a wagon parked near the general store loaded with what appeared to be blasting powder for mining operations. An idea formed, dangerous, potentially disastrous, but offering the kind of distraction they desperately needed. He moved carefully through the crowd as the mayor's speech droned on, extolling the virtues of progress and the prosperity the railroad would bring to redemption. No one paid much attention to an elderly priest making his way toward the edge of the gathering, his expression one of benign interest in the proceedings. The wagon was unattended, its owner presumably among the spectators at the ceremony. Elias approached it casually, examining the crates of blasting powder and the fuses stored in a separate box. It would be simple enough to create a controlled explosion, not close enough to cause injuries, but dramatic enough to draw attention and manpower away from the jail. As he considered placement and timing, a voice spoke from behind him. An interesting area of study for a man of the cloth. Elias turned slowly, maintaining his priestly demeanor despite the surge of adrenaline. A man in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement, stood watching him, hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "The Lord's works include man's ingenuity," Elias replied, gesturing to the blasting powder, "even in such destructive forms." The man stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he studied Elias's face. "Funny thing," he said conversationally. "I attended St. Mary's in Tucson for 15 years. Know every priest in the territory. Don't recall seeing you before Father." Thomas. Elias applied mind racing for a plausible explanation. "Recently arrived from St. Louis. The bishop felt the expanding territories required additional spiritual guidance." "Is that so?" The man's hand moved to his revolver, his friendly demeanor evaporating. "Because I'm thinking you look an awful lot like Elias Blackwood, despite that beard and collar. And Blackwood is a wanted man." The game was up. Elias could see it in the man's eyes, the certainty of recognition, the satisfaction of having caught a notorious fugitive. In seconds, he would draw his weapon, call for assistance, and any chance of freeing Lydia and Anna, of exposing Hollister, would vanish. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, my son," Elias said, taking a step back, calculating angles and distances. "Though I understand the resemblance has been noted before. Hands where I can see them, Blackwood," the man ordered, drawing his revolver with practiced ease. "Or I put a bullet in you right here." Time slowed, options narrowing to a knife edge of possibilities. Elias could surrender hope that Sarah completed her mission at the bank, that Ruth and the others might still find a way to expose Hollister. Or he could fight, knowing that even if he somehow overcame this immediate threat, the commotion would alert others, leading to a manhunt that would end in his capture or death. Neither option guaranteed success for their larger mission. Neither protected Lydia and Anna or ensured Hollister would face justice. But there was a third option, one that offered no personal survival, but might create the opportunity others needed. "Very well," Elias said, raising his hand slowly. "You've caught me. But before you take me in, you should know that Sarah Blackwood is alive. She escaped from Camp 7 along with dozens of other women Senator Hollister had imprisoned there." The man's expression flickered with uncertainty. "What are you talking about? Ask yourself why a U.S. senator is personally overseeing a railroad groundbreaking in a frontier town." Elias continued, taking another step back, closer to the wagon. "Why Marshal Cooper was arrested and transported to Tucson under military guard. Why women have been disappearing along the railroad's path for years." "Shut up," the man ordered, but doubt had entered his eyes. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Instead, Elias reached into his cassock, producing the black book they had taken from Weber's office. "This contains names, dates, transactions. Girls sold into forced labor, and worse, with Hollister's knowledge and approval. Cooper was investigating it. That's why he was removed." The man's aim wavered slightly as confusion warred with duty. "I said, shut up and turn around." "Take the book," Elias said, holding it out. "Read it yourself, then decide whether you're arresting a criminal or silencing the truth." For a moment, it seemed the gambit might work. The man's free hand extended hesitantly toward the book, his expression troubled. Then a shout from the direction of the ceremony shattered the fragile moment. "Reynolds, what's going on over there?" The man, Reynolds, stiffened, professionalism reasserting itself. "Nothing, sir, just apprehending a suspect." He gestured with his revolver. "Drop the book and turn around, Blackwood. Last warning." Elias let the book fall to the ground between them. As Reynolds glanced down at it, instinctively, Elias made his move not toward the man, but toward the wagon. With one powerful motion, he toppled a crate of blasting powder, sending cylindrical charges rolling across the ground. Reynolds fired the bullet, striking Elias in the shoulder, spinning him but not stopping his momentum. He fell against the wagon, hand closing around one of the fuses stored in the open box. "Drop it," Reynolds shouted, advancing cautiously, his revolver trained on Elias's head. "It's over, Blackwood." But it wasn't over. Not while Elias still had breath, still had purpose. Not while Sarah and Lydia and Ruth were counting on him. Not while Hollister stood on that platform untouched by justice. "No," Elias replied. his voice steady despite the fresh pain blooming in his shoulder. It's just beginning. With his remaining strength, he struck a match against the wagon wheel, igniting the fuse in his hand. Reynolds fired again, but too late. The fuse was lit, sparking and hissing as it burned rapidly toward the scattered, blasting powder. Reynolds turned and ran, shouting warnings to the crowd. Elias remained where he had fallen, watching the fuse burn down with a strange sense of peace. He had made his choice, had found his final purpose. Sarah would understand. Lydia would ensure his sacrifice meant something. And perhaps in whatever came after this life, Margaret would be waiting, ready to scold him for his rashness, even as she welcomed him home. The explosion, when it came, was both smaller and larger than he had anticipated, a series of staggered detonations rather than one massive blast, as multiple charges ignited in chain reaction. The wagon disintegrated, wooden splinters and metal fragments sprang outward in a deadly hail. Smoke billowed upward, thick and choking, obscuring vision, and sending the crowd at the ceremony into panicked motion. Elias had expected to die instantly. Instead, he found himself flung backward by the blast, battered but somehow still conscious, still breathing through the pain that enveloped his body like fire. Through the smoke and confusion, he could see soldiers running toward the explosion site, deputies abandoning their posts to assist the ceremony, dissolving into chaos. The distraction he had intended to create, the opportunity Lydia and Anna would need. With the last of his strength, Elias dragged himself into the narrow space between two buildings, concealed from immediate view by debris and smoke. He would rest here just for a moment before trying to reach the rendezvous point at the livery stable. Sarah would be waiting. He had promised to fight to stay alive, to see this through with her. As consciousness began to fade, he thought he heard a woman's voice calling his name. Lydia, perhaps, or Sarah. Or maybe Margaret reaching across the divide that separated them, guiding him home at last. Either way, he had done what he could. The rest was in their hands now. The darkness took him gently like a river carrying a weary traveler toward the sea.